Highness, Your Excellencies, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, can I welcome you to today's World Horse Welfare Conference. It's about the future, and indeed for the very first time this conference is going to be streamed through to YouTube, should the technology hold up. We've got a very, very packed morning, a formal morning in this theatre, and then after lunch there are going to be, for the first time, in the trade fair style, which we've had for the last 3 years, mini presentations at each stand listed in the programme, and I'll tell you a little bit more as the morning goes on about them. But I hope very much that after lunch, as many of you as possible will go and see them. My first job, I'm told, is the health and safety. As you look round the theatre, there are a number of fire escapes. Every exit is a fire escape. Should the alarm sound, we must all make our way out. We must then go to the ground floor, I'm told to remind you, out into the street and up to the Royal Albert Hall, where we have to stand outside and await instructions. If anyone is taken ill, there are a number of staff here who are fully trained in first aid, I'm assured, and we must contact the reception immediately. And if you need the first aid room, it's by the cloakroom where we came in near the ladies' loos. That's done. Let's get on with the conference. The first thing that I want to do is just to say that we are totally indebted to our generous sponsors. There's nothing that this charity could do if it weren't for our supporters being generous to us. And this conference in particular, for the last few years, has depended heavily on the generosity of Betfair. So, first of all, I'm going to ask Gerald Corbett if he'd be good enough to come up. Gerald is the chairman of Betfair, and we all owe him a debt for today. Gerald.
Well, I wore red socks because I thought it would irritate Michael Howard. But in fact, it's rather good because it matches the chairs and Your Royal Highness's own accoutrement attire. Your Royal Highness, Lords, Sirs, Honourable Members, ladies and gentlemen, it's a tremendous pleasure to be here today, and I'm thrilled that Betfair has the opportunity to support such a worthwhile event for the third year running. Rowley and John and everyone at World Horse Welfare, thank you for the opportunity to open the conference with Your Royal Highness, Baroness Mallew, and other extremely wise and knowledgeable speakers and guests. We live in a technology age. The horse continues to make headlines in many different guises. We have dancing horses at the London Olympics, which captured the imaginations of so many of us. We have advertisers giving mobile network provider 3, which has allowed us all to enjoy Shetland ponies moonwalking to Fleetwood Mac, with the accompanying hashtag Dance Pony Dance. The much more serious, of course, horse meat scandal, and continued discussions of safety issues within racing, especially the Grand National, which we were all so pleased to see pass off without any incident this year. In all of this debate and discussion, World Horse Welfare continues to steer a steady ship, armed with expert knowledge and sound advice. We all have an enormous responsibility to the horse in the multitude of different ways it interacts with humans around the world. It feels well-timed to be discussing horses in the next generation and how we can better help secure their welfare wherever they are in the world and whatever job they are being asked to do. We're delighted to be supporting the conference again. We are a leading betting operator, and we seek to work hand in hand with sport. And none is more important to us than horse racing, which is at the heart of our heritage. We are the betting operator most committed to supporting the grassroots of sport. As well as World Horse Welfare, we support other equine charities such as Moorcroft Racing Welfare Centre, Greatwood, the Injured Jockeys Fund, Racing Welfare and Spinal Research, and with the headline sponsors of open days in the country, particularly Lambourne, Newmarket, Malton and Middleton. And absolutely crucial, beating our own drum again, we're the only company to have signed a proper commercial deal with British Racing. We're proud to lead the way in undertaking our responsibilities to racing and therefore the horse, and we would like our competitors to do the same. We have a packed schedule for you this morning, so I'll now pass over to Parry Johnson, the chairman of World Horse Welfare, and I look forward to hearing from the many eminent experts and practitioners we have here today from a wide range of equine specialties. I wish you a most enjoyable day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gerald. We're deeply grateful to Betfair for very generously sponsoring this event for the third year running. It's a testament to the importance of horse welfare and the future of racing. Thank you. Your Royal Highness, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to World Horse Welfare's annual conference. Horses in the next generation. We're delighted that you can join us today as we look into our crystal ball to see what the world will be like for horses when World Horse Welfare celebrates 100 years in 2027. It's always useful when trying to predict the future to learn from the past. Improvements and setbacks in the health and welfare of horses are rarely a surprise. In that light, we'd like to show you a short film that highlights some of the key challenges that World Horse Welfare has faced this last year.
In 21st century Europe, horses may seem to live idyllic lives. But beneath the surface, trouble has been brewing, as was sensationally revealed this year.
The packaging says quite clearly the meat is beef. In fact, tests show this Findus lasagna contains at least 60% horse meat.
Consumers, politicians and food standards groups were horrified by the contamination. Whilst the media were preoccupied with the human interest angle of how consumers were being conned, there were more pressing questions for World Horse Welfare, such as where did the horses come from, and did these horses suffer?
What the horse meat scandal in effect allowed us to do was to shine a spotlight on what is a really murky trade involving tens of thousands of horses, ponies and donkeys.
Even in Britain, laws on humane treatment are not always followed.
3 horses crammed into a slaughter pen. By law, horses should not be slaughtered in sight of one another. But at the Red Lion Abattoir near Nantwich, we found numerous occurrences of this and a host of illegal welfare breaches that add pain and distress to the animals.
What's most important is to ensure that right until the end of their lives, these horses and ponies are treated with care and compassion. And that's why we set out a petition earlier this year, which has had tens of thousands of signatures of people who agree with our call for CCTV in equine slaughterhouses.
Whilst the horse meat scandal highlighted a murky world of abuse and deceit, right now a desperate crisis faces 7,000 horses in England and Wales. Horses and ponies are bearing the cost of the tough economic times and are continuing to be bred despite there being no market for them.
Too many horses are at risk of suffering, and charities cannot solve the problem alone. So far this year, we've taken in 31% more horses than last, but our rehoming hasn't kept up with that. We need people to rehome, and we need the government to tighten up the laws on fly grazing. Wales is already doing this. England needs to do the same or be faced with a big problem next year.
World Horse Welfare has raised funds this year through a new TV appeal, which highlights the plight of abused and neglected horses. Donations are being used to expand urgently needed facilities at our centres to deal with large groups of horses. With more horses than there are good homes, World Horse Welfare is asking horse owners whether they need to breed and to consider the impacts of their choices.
There's no place quite like home, is there? When you have a home sweet home, it's tempting to want to breed a foal of your own. It's easy to think that if you only breed one foal a year, or even just one in your lifetime, you won't have an impact. But the reality is thousands of people are doing the same thing, which means a vast number of new horses every year. Each time a foal is born, the chances of neglect are increased because a good home is filled, shunting another horse into a potentially awful situation. Right now, there are thousands of horses without good homes. Think, do you need to breed?
Horses face different challenges overseas. This year, World Horse Welfare helped to relieve the suffering of more than 10,000 working horses across 3 continents. This was done by working with horse owners to identify the barriers to better horse care, teaching them new skills and helping them better feed and tend to their most important asset.
We set out to address what we think are the major problems for their welfare. So, in order to help the horses, we work with people. But in the end, the thing we are interested in most is the number of horses whose welfare has improved a significant amount.
In the second year of a seminal project in Cambodia, World Horse Welfare has been continuing to work with FEI Solidarity to develop better welfare standards for working and sport horses. The project is bridging the gap between 2 distinct uses of horses, working with communities who rely on their horses for their daily existence and developing horse sport for future generations of Cambodians.
Good lad, well done, well written.
World Horse Welfare's work to improve welfare in horse sport paid off this year, as the use of newly designed fences in the Grand National appeared to make a big difference. There are many practical ways to make horse sport even safer. And there are codes within horse sport that protect horse welfare.
The FEI Code of Conduct was drafted in conjunction with World Horse Welfare and applies to everyone involved in horse sports, whatever discipline, from eventing to dressage to endurance. It is non-negotiable. Equestrian sportsmen and women ignore it at their peril. If it happens, it's a flagrant abuse of equine welfare and does huge damage to all equestrian sport.
But what will the future hold for horses? Will children care for them as we do today? Will they face the same dangers, and what new challenges are on the rise? As World Horse Welfare looks forward to being 100 years old in 2027, we ask how we can prepare to protect horses in the next generation. Welcome to the World Horse Welfare Conference.
As you see in the film, the welfare problems we are seeing today have been a long while in the making. But with forethought and preparation, as we see in horse sport, these risks can be reduced. In my experience as a practicing vet for 40 years, I've seen the problems affecting horses have changed dramatically, as has the public's perception of what these changes are. For instance, we are seeing horses live longer lives, which poses challenges such as dentistry and results in more horses needing extra care and attention when they retire. The major advances in veterinary surgery and medicine lead us to ask the question, because we can do very advanced, expensive diagnostics, do we have to on all horses? The owner, on a limited budget with a much-loved family horse, is being faced with intolerable decisions which may well compromise the animal's welfare. As people's finances have improved over the last 30 years, more people are buying horses and riding them. With the internet, it has never been easier to buy a horse. Indeed, they are probably cheaper now than they have ever been. This can be a good thing, but we have seen all too often that most of them don't have the faintest clue how to look after them, despite World Horse Welfare's website offering a wealth of practical information. In my experience, most cases of abuse are not as a result of cruelty, but more of one of ignorance. And the thing I've never understood is how somebody that knows nothing about horses and buys a horse is an expert within 24 hours. Sadly, cases of neglect always seem to be with us, and if anything, abandonment is rising in Britain as the economic pressures continue to affect horse owners and breeders. Overseas, Working horses are still relied on to be cars, taxis, and lorries, often now serving new industries such as recycling. But the knowledge and skills to care for these horses has been lost. It hasn't been passed down through the generations as it used to because of the result of devastating civil wars, political upheaval. And this is where the role of equine charities such as World Horse Welfare becomes very clear and relevant. And then there are the welfare challenges that are emerging, such as obesity. This is on the rise, and more people see fatter horses as normal and wish to try and emulate them, leading to further health and welfare problems. The variety and availability of modern expensive veterinary drugs is another challenge, where drugs can be purchased on the internet from all over the world and used irresponsibly. The shift in global power and rise of new economies is fueling a surge of interest in equestrianism and equestrian sport, posting new challenges in these countries. How do we prepare for this? What needs to be done to promote and protect horse welfare in this fast-changing, hyper-technical world? This is the focus of our conference today. I would now like you to welcome our President, Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, who will set the scene for just how much the world is changing for our horses across the globe.
Thank you, John. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today, and a special thanks to our sponsor for allowing us to continue with these conferences, which I believe have a very valuable impact on those who are regular supporters, but also spreading the word a bit more widely. They're always interesting, and looking to the future is always a bit of a challenge, but the experience of World Horse Welfare, not just here, but around the globe, helps us to have a reasonable background for making those statements. Welfare, the attitudes to welfare has probably changed a bit in that time. There was an element of leaving people to their own devices, and that knowledge was out there and people understood about looking after horses, particularly in this country. And that has changed, I think, in terms of much greater information, particularly in veterinary medicine, and across the information net. And the education on horse care and management has been created in a way to try and fill that gap. And most of it is pretty good. And yet, there is a great deal of ignorance. And I suspect that has something to do with the ups and downs of the internet. The ups are as you can actually promote good education online. And if you look hard enough and actually read it, it is good information. On the other side, you have a very interesting sounds which come with the advance of Wi-Fi, which can interfere at most extraordinary moments, which we've all suffered from. But the internet does have its downsides, and part of that is the headline-grabbing bit. Oh, you want to buy a horse? That's all right. We can get the information off the net. Yes, you can. It's in black and white. You have to read it, but will you understand it? And will you be able to turn that information into knowledge? Some of you have heard me say this before, but I read the definition of the difference between knowledge and wisdom is that knowledge is knowing that the tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in your fruit salad. And I have a hideous suspicion that an awful lot of the ignorance, which shouldn't need to happen, is linked to the same problem. It's in black and white. But how do you translate that into the fact that this requires 24-hour care 365 days of the year? It doesn't tell you that bit, and it doesn't tell you what that's going to do to your life in order to be able to achieve it. These are the grey areas that perhaps we still need to get through. And having met an individual for whom getting somebody from the local equine college meant that they went home at 5 o'clock didn't go down very well, on the basis that in his day it finished when it finished, not at 5 o'clock. And that too has a bit of a hazard of fitting it into what the modern expectations of life are like. Some of this is, of course, to do with the availability of horses, and arguably they are too cheap at the bottom end of the market. I mean, I would argue that at the other end they've got so ridiculously expensive that you wonder whether they'll ever get out to actually take part in a competition because the fear of damage is so great. But these are issues that are created by greater knowledge and greater enthusiasm and desire to take part. That's not in itself a bad thing, but for us, I think it challenges us to keep on and keep ahead of the need for education and how you do it. In the more international spheres, the working horse environment for world horse welfare is a known environment, and there are certain aspects of that which education tackles. When countries change, where working horses become less and less of an issue, but people become involved in horse sports, you're talking about not only sometimes completely different people, knowledge base, but you're also talking about different breeds who in those countries will not have that experience, or will actually prove for them to be a more difficult place to live that maybe the horses, their working horses, had. Probably tougher, better able to cope with the climates and the diseases that are there. But if you want to join an international sports horse competition, then your chances are, thanks to the internet, you will go and buy one off the net who is good at what he does, but maybe completely unsuited to the environment in which you want it to exist. Now that means that the challenges for us in terms of education will continue to change, I think, in understanding where those problems might be and how you might tackle them. I mean, we know that the education on horse care and management has never been so widely available. But that actually does challenge us even more to understand where those gaps are and how we're going to fill them. How do we explain to those countries moving on from where the horse was very much a tool to that where it becomes a friend and a sporting companion? The other side of the coin, that we've also created a problem to ourselves. You mentioned obesity, but the difference between the challenges of cost of keeping a horse, when horses were kept outside in fields and you had space to do so, and it wasn't quite such a challenge on your pocket, and they lived a more natural form of existence, to where space is at a premium, and that actually a lot of people think that they're doing the horse a favour by keeping it in most of its life, because they feel it's more comfortable to have it in a nice warm stable, or a warmer stable, covered in blankets and getting fatter and fatter, than it is actually to be outside and doing what it should do, which is to put its head down and graze. I was a little bit bothered that we wouldn't get a bit like the dairy unit I came across, a huge dairy unit. And when I made the comment that I didn't think it looked as if they had enough grass, he said, I hate to tell you this, he said, the last time we let the cows out, they just stood and looked at it. Don't think we want to get to that stage with horses. It would be useful if they continued to understand what grass was for. And that argument about obesity, I'm afraid I had much closer to home with a rug on a Shetland pony. That caused considerable rage and short. What do you think it's a fat little pony for now in the summer? That's for it to live on in the winter, you know, along with its coat, which it already has. And that's with people who actually, you would argue, are very good at their job. And they look after the horses very well. But actually there are differences. Now we have challenges in countries such as Brazil and China, where that work horse, competition horse, international competition horse, is taking place. It's not that they don't know about horses, they've got plenty of them. It's not that they haven't been involved with them over hundreds and thousands of years, but the way they want to use them is changing. And we need to be able to understand how to encourage them to do that to the standards that certainly the FEI would assume would be correct. And we have other countries countries like Poland, as well as Cambodia, still working animals. Poland, of course, we quite often highlight in terms of transport of horses, but it's worth noting transport of horses itself is the problem, not the horses or indeed the way they were brought up. Many of those horses look absolutely wonderful when they leave Poland. It's the problems that occur in transport and where they're going. Our attitudes to the horse meat trade, I think might, and the value of horse meat may have to change, partly because if that's true then, and they value their horses, they look after them well because they're in the horse meat trade, and it's the transport that are the problem, should we be considering a real market for horse meat? And would that reduce the number of welfare cases if there was a real value in the horse meat sector? I'd chuck that up for what it's worth, because I think it needs a debate. And arguably, our response to the horse meat scandal, the scandal was that that was food that was improperly marked, not that it had horse meat in it. And that if you'd put the correct label on it and put it back on the shelves, that would have been the correct answer for everybody, because we need to be more honest about what's happening. And as I was reminded not so long ago by somebody who travelled in France, the most expensive piece of meat in the local butcher was a fillet of horse meat. We've got to face that. We've got to understand whether that value has also a part to play in how we reduce welfare cases, because the value of the animal to every individual is slightly different. But if it has real financial value, then you look a little bit further ahead in the way in which you look after your animals. Now, the presentation stands that you will see later, I think, will help with that debate, and I hope you will go to those presentations after the break and ask some of those questions. But there is no doubt that although we always think we've got the answer, and if we've kept animals reasonably well over the years, we think we're doing it properly. And yet every now and again we're reminded that something has gone wrong, we lose an animal in spite of our best attempts, and we wonder whether there was something we should have done differently. And we need as an organisation to constantly go back and look at that. Not to make it too complicated. We don't need to do that. I really do believe that's true. I know that the complications come sometimes from the fact that there is a market out there, and veterinary medicine has become more complicated. People are better at selling you things that you probably don't need. All of that needs to be dealt with, and we have to keep our eye on the things that really matter in terms of welfare for horses, wherever they may be. But we can't do that without you. And it's that broad-based support of understanding for what horse welfare means around the world that makes it possible for us to do a much better job at relieving the suffering that does exist. So thank you for joining us today.
It would not have been possible to have a more comprehensive or practical and sensible keynote speech, and can I thank on your behalf Her Royal Highness. I move on now to the future of racing, and I'm going to ask Michael Howard, Lord Howard of Lymm, who for the last 5 years has been chairman first of Northern Racing and now of Arena Racing Club, but we all know was Home Secretary and also leader of the opposition in another life. I'm going to ask him to come and give us his view of the future. Michael.
Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, I've had to follow some hard acts in my time, but I've never had to follow the Princess Royal before. It is a very daunting experience, and indeed, when I was first asked to address this conference this morning and told that I was going to follow the Princess Royal, I felt rather like the friend of Lester Piggott, who told him that he'd been asked to speak to the boys at Eton about racing. "What shall I tell them?" asked the friend. "Tell them you're ill," replied Lester. But I'm here, as we're all here, because I love horses. To my mind, there's no more beautiful animal in the world. And not for the first time, I agree with Ronald Reagan, who said, there is nothing better for the inside of a man than the outside of a horse. Of course, when it comes to the welfare of the horse, we need to be clear what we're talking about. For my part, I want to make it quite clear, and I hope I'm not going to offend anyone present, that I'm not talking about something which I very recently come across called, in quotes, natural horsemanship. In fact, I can't resist reading to you part of an article which Melissa Kite recently wrote in The Spectator on this subject. Melissa has, of course, written elsewhere about the splendid work done by this charity. And I'm not going to read that out, but this is what she had to say about natural horsemanship. Natural horsemanship, she said, has a lot to answer for. After a cross-country event the other day, I rode back to my trailer to find the two women parked next to me doing some very strange things as they loaded their horse. One woman led the pony up the ramp quite efficiently, flicking it with the rope to stop it hesitating and then shut it inside, whereupon her friend shouted, "No, get him back off, quickly!" And she lowered the ramp, untied the pony and pushed him back down the ramp. "He's got to choose to load," said the woman, who I now noticed was a little harebrained looking. "He's got to choose to load." A conversation then ensued between the loony woman and the same woman, in which the loony woman insisted that horses must be allowed to self-load onto trailers. The loony woman then started to lead the poor pony round in circles, waving a rope in the air and making cattle herding noises. After about the fifth circle, she ran towards the ramp and let the pony go, which was apparently the signal for the pony to choose to load. But you know what's coming next. The pony, being a pony and not a human being who could rationalize the future and understand he was going home and that all would soon be well, chose not to load. He chose to stop and stare at the scary, gaping mouth of the trailer. Then he chose to lower his head to eat the grass. The loony woman tied him to the back of the trailer in front of the lowered ramp on a short lead so that he couldn't eat or do anything but stand looking up the ramp into the terrifying dark recess. And he stood like that for the next hour. "How long do you suppose they're going to wait for it to choose to load?" I asked the builder boyfriend, who was busy throwing a bucket of water over my horse. Says Melissa, "It's going to choose to stand there all night by the look of it," he said. So let me make it clear that I am not a devotee of natural horsemanship. I am, however, a horse racing enthusiast. And as you've heard, I'm chairman of a group that owns and operates 14 racecourses in England and Wales. And I love the sport as I have ever since I was a schoolboy. And of course, it is incumbent on all of us to whom horses give such enormous pleasure to care about their welfare. Horse racing is not, of course, by any means new. Ovid once said in Roman times, "A horse never runs so fast as when he has other horses to catch up and outpace." So racing is, in a very real sense, a natural activity for the horse. And modern horse racing began in England. Indeed, the racecourses in the group which I chair include Doncaster, the home of the St. Leger, the oldest classic in the world. But as we've seen in other quite closely related areas, the fact that an activity has been carried out for centuries does not always secure its future. There are several aspects of racing which have attracted a degree of criticism. There are those who object to the racing of two-year-olds, to racing horses over hurdles and fences, to the use of the whip, and of course, to doping. Where criticism is justified, I believe that British racing authorities have taken appropriate action. I welcome the changes that have been made to the Grand National course at Aintree, and to the use of the whip, and the stringent attitude taken by the British authorities to the use of banned substances. Of course, one of the most difficult areas relates to what happens at the end of a horse's life. I recently had a very personal, sad and poignant experience when a racehorse in which I had a share, who had won several races, broke a tendon during a race at Chester. He was kept alive for a couple of days in the hope that he might survive before he suffered what had probably been an inevitable fate. It was the loss of a great friend, a real friend who'd given me some of my most thrilling and memorable moments on a racecourse. And it was a very sad day. The fact that modern racing started in Britain does, I think, place a special responsibility on our authorities to take a lead in ensuring that the sport is conducted with full regard for the welfare of the horses that take part. Yet racing now takes place on every continent in the world. Each racing jurisdiction jealously guards its independence, and best practice does not spread instantly. There are many encouraging signs. The recent incident of substance abuse in Britain, not in itself an encouraging sign, was nevertheless followed by a tightening up of regulations in a number of other countries, though not yet, alas, in all. And the decision last month of the International Equestrian Federation and the International Federation of Horse Racing Authorities to come together to create the International Horse Sports Confederation could, and hopefully will, accelerate the rate of progress. The fact that protecting horse welfare and maintaining strong doping control policy are included in the key priorities to which both bodies have signed up provide the basis for at least a degree of optimism. But the challenges are going to be particularly considerable as racing spreads to new jurisdictions. In September, I attended a horse racing event in Ho Hot in Inner Mongolia, which is of course part of China. Horse racing is in its infancy in China, though many people believe that it could grow at an exponential rate in the next few years. If this happens, it will be vital that proper attention is paid to the welfare of the horses that take part, and the new international body could have an important part to play in achieving this. So, to return to the question which I was set to answer this morning, one standard for all? No, not yet, but there are hopeful signs. However, I'm afraid world horse welfare will be needed for many years to come. I pay tribute to your work and wish you well in all your future endeavours.
Thank you, Michael. That was a fascinating and a personal glimpse into the future of racing, and will, I'm sure, provoke some questions in a short time when I ask you to come back with the rest of the speakers this morning. I'm going to turn now to the rise of equestrianism, because our next speaker is Alex Hua Tian, who is an Olympic equestrian of great success. He is going to come and talk to us, having been China's first Olympic eventer and an equestrian star there, and he's going to talk to us about the rise of equestrianism, particularly in relation to his own country. Alex.
Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real honour to be invited by World Horse Welfare to talk today, and thank you, Your Royal Highness, for briefly mentioning Brazil and China and the changing challenges faced in these regions. It's a good introduction to what I'm going to be talking about. I think that over the last 40 years, the equine world in the West has changed dramatically. If you think that, you will be staggered by the growth of the horse world in the growing economies in the last 5 to 10 years. One such example is China. Currently, China cannot hold meaningful international competitions, as they cannot set up a quarantine zone. Racing is pending approval, as gambling is illegal, and the basic drugs and medications we rely on here in the UK are not licensed or available. Despite all of these hurdles and restrictions, the growth of the equestrian industry over the last 5 years, since the Beijing Olympics in 2008, is estimated to be 15 to 20% each year. Last year, 2,000 horses were imported, with numbers and values of these horses growing year on year. And an estimated 50 to 60 million pounds were spent over the last 2 years building new riding schools, of which there are now 500 to 600. Picture up here is one of the most amazing indoor schools I've ever seen at the Equestrianism Club near Beijing. It will appear that the hard work of the FEI and the several different racing bodies and authorities and the polo world is starting to pay off. Somehow the sports most synonymous with Western tradition and elitism look like they are on the verge of becoming truly global sports. Following these sports, a whole new industry within the equine industry here in the West has begun to flourish, exporting not just horses and bloodstock to the least likely of places, but the expertise and services that go hand in hand, such as training, management, veterinary, farriery, construction, stables, surfaces, feed, insurance, equipment, tack, apparel, etc., etc. These are a few of the companies that everybody here will know of that have significant footholds in the Chinese market or are very interested in going out there. Within the sport of eventing, we have had first-hand experience of this growth, also over the last 5 to 10 years. New individual riders from untraditional, non-horsey countries are making their presence known on the international circuit. At the top end of the sport, the contests for individual places at the Olympics have suddenly become incredibly competitive over the last 2 Olympic Games, and only anticipated to get tougher for Rio and beyond. This diversification has been even more significant and influential in the show jumping world, driven not just through the FEI, but also the Global Champions Tour and the Masters Series. With significant prize pots, these show jumping competitions are drawing top international riders and horses around the world to the Middle East, the Orient, Southeast Asia, and South America, attracting new audiences and inspiring the new generation of riders from your non-pony club background. I genuinely see this as the start of a snowball effect, and I anticipate that my generation of rider will have unparalleled opportunities to compete in exotic venues around the world, introducing our sports to new audiences and riding against a new generation of riders from wonderfully untraditional background. So why the sudden growth now? Actually, as a sport, and that is equestrian sports as a whole, we are severely behind the curve. Sport in general has grown, changed, become incredibly commercial, and generates enormous amounts of global interest. In fact, I cannot think of another sphere of life that has as much global access and influence as major sports. The equestrian world is moving with the times, just. In my opinion, other than the genuine hard work of the FEI, I believe this global growth and diversification has been driven by the glamorous and elitist image of the sport. On the other hand, here in the West, the sports have developed beyond this, understanding that to grow means attracting new audiences by attempting to appear less elitist and more accessible. A successful strategy which has increased the participation and reach of our sports immeasurably over the last 30 years. However, in China and other such growing economies and cultures new to the horse world, with their new availability to wealth, and a lot of it, the elitist image of the equestrian sports is something to aspire to. There is no doubt that it is the individual, wealthy enthusiasts in these countries who are driving the growth. According to the Hurun report, which is on the corner of that picture, who published the Chinese Rich List and the China Luxury Consumer Survey, horse riding is the fastest growing sport or healthy pursuit doubling year on year among the high net worth individuals, coming 5th among those with £10 million assets or above, after swimming, golf, mountain walking, and yoga. It's still 5th, though. Having said what I've said, it's difficult to imagine that there are any difficulties in this picture. With the overall trends mentioned, i.e. global horse sport on the rise, subsistence farming on the slow decline, and the equine's role in agriculture becoming less influential, the equestrian world's focus on horse welfare is shifting. As the world comes closer to the West and aspire to the lifestyle we lead here, it will not be that long until cultures that are new to the racing world, show jumping world, polo world, etc., will be on a similar level to what we enjoy here in the UK and the West. From my somewhat unique perspective, with one foot here in the UK, an established equestrian nation, and another foot in China, watching the beginnings of their equestrian growth spurt, the two worlds are in stark contrast. When we say modern horse sport here in the UK, we mean sports and the sporting industries around them that have developed and evolved slowly over at least 100 years. We are extremely lucky to enjoy the infrastructure and support that organisations such as World Horse Welfare and BHS, Pony Club, the British Horse Racing Board, and all the sports governing bodies are all, these are all essential infrastructure and organisations, and not only ensure crucial structure, regulation and qualification to our established industries, but are also the backup in times of individual and personal or even national decline. In China and such countries new to the horse world, there is nothing. There is no regulation or qualification for vets, farriers, riding schools, instructors and trainers, breeding, the list goes on. There is currently no access to bute or even basic antibiotics that we rely so strongly on here in the UK. Anyone carrying them into the country is liable to serious criminal penalties for smuggling, and foreign vets are not allowed to even practice officially in the country. It is these facts, coupled with the extraordinary growth forecast for the equestrian industry in China, that particularly worry me. This growth will not occur over 100 years, gently and organically like it has here. There are too many driving forces, both domestically in China and in the West. It looks like this growth may well be built on unstable foundations, driven by extraordinary wealth domestically, and by Western companies looking to develop and tap into a new and exciting market. Unlike normal industries, where the risk of growing quickly by trial and error can hurt the wallets of those involved, in the equine world, those hurt most in these circumstances will be the horses involved. So where do we go from here? Talking about China in detail once again, there are two factors which could affect this rate of growth significantly. Firstly, once the quarantine issues are sorted and horses are able to not only fly in but also fly out, it will enable true international competition at the top level of the sport to be held in China. Lifting this restriction will drive enormous growth from the high-profile competitions, drawing further attention and becoming an even more prestigious pursuit for those wealthy Chinese families. Secondly, the most influential and politically charged subject matter, touched on by Lord Howard, in the equestrian world in China is the lifting of restrictions on racing and gambling. The racing fraternity is building up capacity in the hope that the sport will be approved in the near future. Both Dali and Coolmore have breeding organisations. The Hong Kong Jockey Club is setting up a training centre in Chonghua in the south of China. There is a massive racing development planned in Tianjin and a jockey training organisation set up in Shanghai. From all of this, you can understand how big a racing deal and its potential approval is in China, and how financially exciting this market is to those in the Western racing world. It is essential, and in my opinion, it is the responsibility of those Western companies and organisations driving this growth and applying pressure for these changes to ensure that their proposals and plans involve, as a priority, allowances for the welfare of those horses involved. A difficult thing to ask and put forward when there is increasing competition and so much money involved. As a family, we are working hard to help the relevant authorities with these issues. My mother, who's British, has lived and worked in China for 30 years, and is also the senior advisor to the Chinese Equestrian Association, the governing sports body. She's been involved in the industry from its absolute beginning, and from our discussions there, it is boundless enthusiasm and genuine gratefulness for any help on any of these matters. From our experience, the issue is not in China. Those involved in the industry are aware of the problems they face. However, they do not have the access and contacts here to seek support and do anything about it. Furthermore, there are very few Western companies and organizations there with their helping or welfare hat on. And so there is nobody with the expertise to help on these matters that do not have a conflicting commercial interest. Over the last 10 years, we as a family have worked very hard to put the relevant people together in terms of training vets, stewards, judges, training instructors and officials, as well as getting Chinese media involved in not just the showing and exciting side of the sport, but the requirements behind the scenes for animal welfare and hard graft. We are working on a case-by-case basis, which, although gives us a wonderful sense of self-gratification, is woefully inadequate. Future welfare issues in the sports world in China is not only potentially distressing for those horses and individuals involved, but potentially hugely damaging to the industry, and is now recognized that it is in everybody's interest to ensure that the right building blocks are in place. China is obviously at the extreme end of the spectrum of examples of the global trend of growth and increasing accessibility. But I think many of the trends and potential welfare issues and their potential solutions are the same in other regions where horse sport and equestrian industries are developing quickly. It will take a lot of time, work, and coordination between different cultures. Different regions have different issues and different factors that could affect their growth, and understanding these are crucial to setting up effective organizations and structures that can help support and promote horse welfare within this growth. Looking to the future, there are so many unanswered questions, but it is these questions that my generation will be asking, and these problems that we will be facing, and as always, the sooner we ask, face, and start addressing these issues, the safer, more sustainable the growth will be, with hopefully less need for trial by error. As the FEI's independent welfare advisors, we can be sure that World Horse Welfare will continue to play an influential role at the heart of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. That was a fascinating insight into what I think we're going to see and hear a great deal more about. Thank you. If equestrianism and competition are in the limelight in the horse world, this year in particular, we've learned a lot more about what goes on in the shadows. And the next speaker is Felicity Lawrence, who is an investigative reporter at The Guardian, and she's the author of an acclaimed book about the food industry. And it's in part as a result of the cooperation with this charity, which has provided her with some of her information, that she has recently updated her book, Not on the Label. Felicity Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, Lords, ladies and gentlemen. And as I come from The Guardian, I should satirise ourselves. We would normally say, good morning, comrades, too. Not really, not really. I'm very honoured to be invited here. It's true that when I started investigating the horse meat scandal, I found that World Horse Welfare was an enormously valuable source of information, that they had long expertise, but that they had experts on the ground doing extraordinary work, a lot of which can't be discussed very publicly, but was deeply impressive, and they were very reliable without any axe to grind or hysteria, just doing their job. So I found that fantastically useful to me as I investigated. The horse meat scandal was one of the biggest food frauds ever, and it involved some of the largest corporations in Europe, these huge names, Tesco, Asda, ABP, big brands like Findus. as an investigative journalist, I was very aware that these were people who had quite a long history of suing the press for libel, and that I had to tread very carefully. Trying to find out what happened, how this extraordinary thing that our mainstream food system could become adulterated with undeclared horse seemed to me terribly important, and yet it was going to be very difficult. The supply chain stretched across many jurisdictions, they were globalized. I was likely, as the authorities and investigators in enforcement were going to be, I was going to have to deal in different languages with lots of different countries. And there were a lot of people who would rather that the information didn't come out, and I think probably most of it still has not come out, despite our best efforts. And it became clear very quickly that actually it was also being run by organized crime. And that to me was very shocking, that we could have one of our most, well, food manufacturing is the largest manufacturing sector in the UK now, and that it could be caught up unwittingly with organised crime was quite extraordinary. But I learnt quite quickly that people who were deep inside the industry were worried that the culprits wouldn't ever be brought to justice, and that the chains were so long and complex, it was going to be very hard to hold them to account. And I've had the most extraordinary sources of information from people in lots of different walks of life who really want the truth to come out but fear it won't. One of the things I wanted to do, as well as unpicking the supply chain and trying to work out who the culprits were, was to look at the context in which this had happened. And it seemed to me we were talking about failed markets, and the reason that the adulteration had taken place was that companies, both supermarkets and processors, were trying to defy the laws of economics. Although in theory they're free markets, what we've got is a handful of very powerful retailers dominating European food retailing. 3/4 of the UK grocery market is in the hands of just 4 chains, and that concentration of corporate power has been matched in the manufacturing and processing sectors, where you've got just a handful of dominant beef processors. And actually both sides are now locked in. It's a bit like the bank. Some of the beef processors are too big to fail. They might have sent you beef adulterated with horse, but if you wanted to sack them and say you were very unhappy with that, you actually wouldn't be able to get enough supply from anyone else. The other context, key part of this context, is that there has been over successive governments, both Conservative and Labour, a trend towards deregulation and lightening the burden on business. And in my eyes, this was therefore a scandal waiting to happen. There's much less inspection in meat plants, a cutting of funding to trading standards and local authorities, the sorts of people who might enforce. And with apologies to Lord Howard and his very entertaining speech, I don't think industry chooses to behave on the whole. I think it needs the gentle flick of the rope to go up the ramp. So the art of the economically impossible, why fraud took place. The price of beef had been going up dramatically. It's because demand's been increasing globally as emerging economies change their diets and switch to more affluent ways of eating, wanting more meat. And we've got the impact of climate change, which is affecting the price of grain. And so the costs for beef producers have gone up very dramatically. And the wholesale price of beef had in fact doubled between 2008 and 2011. Now, in a market that was working properly, you would expect those price signals to feed back and for beef farmers to get more money and to be encouraged to increase production. In fact, most beef farmers in the UK were making a loss at the time, and they weren't getting the money from the chain. Meanwhile, supermarkets had been driving down the price of frozen beef burgers to consumers. They were using them as a key competitive weapon and actually paying below the cost of production. So you've got a doubling of wholesale beef prices between 2008 and 2011, but the price of frozen beef burgers, because this is what was mostly affected, it was the sort of very low value, cheap foods at the bottom of the range, they had actually come down to the price that they were in 2008, which was just not sustainable. The cost of the raw material of a frozen beef burger was 43p. If you were going to use beef that was actually beef of a reasonable quality, not expensive fancy stuff, but just basic beef trim with a reasonable amount of lean to fat. But in fact, supermarkets were selling them at 25p a burger. There was just this huge gap in the real cost. And I don't think they should have been surprised that somewhere in the chain someone resorted to fraud. If you consistently sell below the cost of production and squeeze your suppliers that hard, what are they going to do? But why horse? I think there are several reasons. One is obviously that other speakers have touched on, is that there's a surplus, there's an excessive breeding. You've got austerity, you've got owners suddenly finding it very expensive to feed their animals. You've got a horse passport system that's really in chaos. Over 70 organisations that are allowed to issue passports. So it's almost impossible for inspectors in factories to actually recognise them all and really keep control of it. A lot of the factory inspection has been downgraded or removed. So, for example, cutting plants where some of the adulteration must have taken place don't actually have to have inspection all the time anymore. Trading standards who might have tested more, had their funding cut. The ownership of horses is largely unregulated. And of course, the whole business was highly profitable. What you were seeing was horse dealers buying horses for 5 to 10 euros. They're horses in very poor condition, worth almost nothing. But once they've been turned into a meat carcass, they're worth about 400 euros. They also knew that detection was very unlikely. Nobody was testing for horse in beef. They just simply didn't expect it to be there. And so inevitably, you get crime filling this vacuum. You get beef processors and people further down the supply chain not able to make money, so needing to find sources of very cheap ingredients and not asking many questions. And you've got plenty of people who can see this extraordinary source of very easy money. There was a tremendous moment in the Select Committee, EFRA Select Committee in Parliament, where a manufacturer, processor, explained why horses were such terrific stuff to adulterate beef with. When you're making a very cheap economy beef burger, you're filling it mostly with fat, but you need something to get the protein in. And as he explained, a horse that hasn't been fed for very long, or a horse that's been racing, is tremendously lean. It's got almost no fat on it. So if you put a bit of that in, it ups your visual lean. That's the technical term they use. And the beef fat suddenly starts to look as though it's got a bit of protein in it. I think the other important point is that these foods in which horse ended up are so deracinated and so legally adulterated with additives, water, flavourings, fat generally, that they're unrecognisable. And although people have told me that it's very obvious what the difference between horse and beef is, if you see a chunk of it, once you've minced it up and shipped it around, it's quite hard to tell. So who actually was doing it? We still don't know. The crucial part of the crime, the fraud, was mislabeling. It's fine to sell horse. It's fine even to mix horse with beef, so long as it's labelled. And the fraud was the moment at which people deliberately put the wrong label on. But it's proved extraordinarily hard to pinpoint where that happened. After a few months working on this, I had all sorts of people coming to me who were really keen that some of this should get out. And I decided, there are lots of strands, it's a globalized network crossing lots of borders. I decided to look at one strand just to try and see how this extraordinary adulteration could have happened. And it was crucial to me. People were making very funny jokes about it. It is sort of quite funny in a way. And nobody had died of eating horse meat, and as some cultures do eat it anyway. And there was a sort of sense that, well, you know, actually it's quite expensive, nice stuff. I don't mind eating horse. But my experience of investigating the food industry was that it was very unlikely to be nice horse meat, and it was quite important to try and make public what sort of horse had been going into the supply chain. So with the help of various organisations, including World Horse Welfare, I looked at some of the dealers and sources of the raw material, so to speak, and they were the eyes and ears on the ground and had been following for a long time what was happening. And as part of that, I became aware of a convicted drug smuggler who was a major horse dealer from Northern Ireland called Lawrence McAllister. He's now in jail in Scotland. And he had been dealing in horses at fairs around Ireland and in the north, and corralling them often at night, and then shipping them across through Scotland on down to abattoirs in the UK. And I was told that one of the final destinations of his horses had been the Red Lion Abattoir. He was doing two things. He was smuggling horses, but then he was using his horse boxes to actually smuggle drugs on the way back. And that's what he was caught doing, with a huge load, £500,000 worth of cannabis hidden in the horse box as it went back to Belfast. He had been found shipping animals that weren't fit for slaughter, but also transporting them when they were really suffering quite dramatically. And he was later charged with animal cruelty offences for shipping horses that had chest wounds, sepsis, diarrhoea, and lots of false passports and illegal veterinary medicines. As I say, I had heard from various very reliable sources that the final destination for his load was the Red Lion Abattoir. We've already seen earlier some of the animal welfare film footage that was secretly filmed in that abattoir, showing 3 horses being killed at once, workers beating them as they were trying to get them into slaughter. I should say the Red Lion Abattoir denies ever knowingly sourcing horses from McAllister. This is a feature of this story. Everybody throughout says, I didn't know, and actually it looks as though that will be enough for there not to be any real charges. The Red Lion, as I say, had attracted a lot of attention. It was known to animal rights activists for animal cruelty. It has currently been charged with some offences under the Food Regulation Act. But the animal rights people had also tracked some of the lorries of horse meat leaving Red Lion, and they very kindly sent me the data sets of those. So I was able to crawl through hours and hours of GPS stats and find out where some of those lorries of horse meat went. They say that all the horse meat that left their abattoir was correctly labelled as horse meat and was perfectly legal, and it certainly was legal to sell and ship out horse meat. But one of the addresses that popped up as I crawled through those data sets was this address that I recognised in Holland. And it was a Dutch meat cutting plant owned by somebody called Willie Selton. Now, I remembered that he had been part of the Dutch inquiries and that he had been raided by the Dutch authorities who asked him to recall hundreds of thousands of tons of meat that he'd sent around Europe because he didn't have the paperwork to show where it had been. So I set off for Holland and interviewed some of the Polish workers who'd worked for him. And this is another key feature of these globalized chains. Wherever I come across animal welfare abuses or allegations of animal welfare abuses, they're almost always abuses of workers too, and very frequently it's of migrant workers who are fearful that they don't have full rights. And sure enough, when I got to Holland and interviewed the people who had worked for Willie Selton, there were large numbers of Polish workers who had been paid in cash, who had had to work very long unofficial shifts. And what they described was really pretty disgusting and horrific. They said that they had been receiving horse meat from the Red Lion for up to 5 years, and that they had been mixing it with ancient defrosted beef that was so old and green and putrid they could only work by holding towels over their faces to stop themselves gagging. The Dutch owner, Willie Selton, was arrested shortly after I wrote a piece. He was arrested shortly after and questioned on suspicion of fraud and false accounting, which he denies. He was said by the Dutch authorities to have sent out enough meat, 50,000 tons of meat, horse and beef mixed, and that's enough for 100 million packs of burgers. Who knows where they all are? He denies fraud. So I was able to kind of piece together that bit of the chain, but I still wanted to get at where the supermarkets, where we all shop, where their stuff had come from. It wasn't in their interest to tell me. There was a wall of silence there. The processors were also being silent about where they'd sourced the meat that had been horse. They all said they hadn't known they were handling horse, but they wouldn't give any names of where it had come from. But in the course of that, I had long discussions over an extended period with the biggest company involved, Anglo Beef Processors, ABP, which is the leading beef processor in Europe, a huge company. And it admitted that it had used traders to source cheap ingredients for its frozen burgers at a particular factory in Ireland. It said that it had never knowingly processed horse, but it did admit that its managers at that factory had failed to follow the contracts and specifications they have in supermarkets and had brought in meat from unauthorized traders. One of those unauthorized traders was Norwest Foods. And at this point, I was crawling through lots of company records and trying to make connections between people. Norwest rang a bell because it had been set up by Ray McSharry Jr., who is from a very famous family, Irish farming family. His father was Irish agriculture minister and then EC commissioner, and the family have a great passion for horse racing. Norwest owned up eventually that it had bought from Willie Selton, this Dutch trader. It said it never knew that it had bought horse, but it wouldn't answer any other questions, like did they actually pay enough to know that they were getting beef, or were they paying so little that it was horse? All these questions were just not answered. And then after long exchanges, the big beef processor, ABP, said yes, actually it had taken meat from Willie Selton, the Dutch trader, through this intermediary, Norwest, and that had been used at its factory in Ireland. The ABP is sorry, I'll slip back there. ABP is a fascinating company in that it's owned by Larry Goodman. He is one of Ireland's most successful and richest businessmen. But his companies were subject of a huge public inquiry into fraud in the beef industry in the 1980s. And if anyone's got time, there's a 1,400-page report of that inquiry, which I managed to unearth, and it was published without summary or without index, but within it, if you plough through it, you can find all sorts of things that are fascinating as a history of fraud in the beef industry. So where did ABP send its stuff? ABP was one of the principal suppliers to the UK supermarkets, and it sent from this particular factory that had taken meat from Selton without knowing that it was horse. It had made burgers for Tesco, the Co-op, Aldi and Burger King, all of which turned out to have been adulterated with horse. In the case of Tesco, the beef burgers contain not just a little horse, but 29% horse. So quite a major adulteration. So I asked these players, do you know where your horse came from? I accept you don't know that you were handling horse at any point, but did it come from Selton? If it came from Selton, was it stuff that had come from the Red Lion? If it had come from the Red Lion, was it stuff that had come from this convicted drug smuggler and horse dealer Lawrence McAllister? It probably won't surprise you that none of them wanted to answer any of those questions. So the investigation continues. That's just one strand where I was able to piece together how different bits of it related to the next bit and potentially how they all related, although of course I can't say that that whole circle actually happened. There are other strands, and we've published some others in The Guardian, and there are others pending. Could it happen again? The big question for me is, where do all the unwanted horses go now? The chains are still as long and complex as there ever were, very hard to track, very hard to police, and traceability is paper-based and is worth as much as the paper it's written on, i.e. almost nothing. As I've mentioned already, I think this horse meat scandal, to me, just conforms to a pattern when you get these enormously long, complex, globalized food chains. It is so common for me investigating to find animal welfare abuse, worker exploitation, illegal employment, lots of migrant workers, environmental degradation, and they're producing so often food that's of very low quality nutrition, and not actually healthy for people to eat. The Princess Royal asked whether actually should we accept that horse is a legitimate part of the meat chain, and would that help? For me, I think the answer to that is there would be no point to this if the horses had been properly looked after and properly fed and properly raised, because what people were looking for was a cheap shortcut. If horses had to be, for meat, had to be raised to the same kind of welfare standards that we expect of proper beef, the economics of it wouldn't have made any sense. It sort of happened because they needed to find some cheap substitute. Thank you very much.
I think we're all indebted to Felicity, not just for talking to us and putting us very much more fully in the picture, but also for the work that she has done on this. This is something that clearly has been going on for many years, of which most of us had virtually no knowledge at all. I'm going to ask our other speakers to come up, please. We've got probably about 15 minutes for questions. Alex, Michael. I'm going to ask people who want to ask a question to put your hands up. Someone will then come with a microphone, and if you would be kind enough to stand up and give your name and your organisation if that's appropriate. So can I invite questions to any or all the members of our panel? Can't believe there aren't some. There's a gentleman there, and then the next one in front of him, there's a gentleman who's also put his hand up. He will follow on. Yes, please.
Graham Duncanson, a practitioner from Norfolk, and I'd like to ask the panel, has any good come out of this year's scandal?
Right, I think you probably all heard that, but I'm under orders to repeat it in case you haven't. Has any good come out of this year's scandal? Can I start with someone other than Felicity? I'm sorry. I'm being told that that is going to be a question that's going to be asked at the discussion forum later. Would you mind very much if we didn't answer it now, because we will have the minister who's dealing with it later, and that might be the more appropriate moment. Will you forgive me if we go straight to the gentleman sitting?
Let us off the hook.
Yes.
Miles Williamson, Noble National Equine Forum. I'm sure Rolly will tell me it's going to be in the later on bit, but a slightly different approach to the meat side. We've tended to concentrate on the scandal and the mislabelling. Now, some of the European countries, who may or may not eat meat very much, but the horse meat trade is actually very valuable in maintaining or raising the standards of the equines bred there. I'm thinking in particular of Switzerland, where certainly until recently, and I think going on still, about half the stock at the national stud for Haflingers go into the meat trade, which enables them to keep and concentrate on the best animals for both riding and the stud side. Is there some prospect, or would there be some benefit actually for highlighting and bringing out the good aspects of the meat trade rather than treating it always as something that's sort of below the carpet, not very nice to talk about, and linked into the scandal?
Thank you. I think there's a similarity in that question, but let's see how we get on. Felicity.
Well, I'm sure it would be good if horses are being bred, there needs to be some outlet for the ones that aren't needed. And it's very interesting seeing the reports of the horse fairs this year on Dartmoor with lots of people saying actually nobody's buying them anymore. That's because the dealers have gone, because they aren't able to put the horse meat into this trade that turned out to be illicit. At some point, I have to keep saying, they all deny ever knowingly doing anything wrong. But I still feel that for horse meat to become sort of viable, you get into the need for this scale, and as the Princess Royal talked about, going to a beef farm where you've got 1,000 cattle who don't go out and eat grass and don't even know what it is. If you're actually rearing horse for the meat trade in any sort of serious way, you would immediately get into those sorts of areas.
Michael, would you like to add?
Well, I think this was really a point touched on by the Princess Royal. And I think whether or not people want to eat horse meat must, in the end, be a matter for them. It is a part of the diet in many European countries, but it has to be on the basis that people know what they're eating. I mean, the mischief, there were two aspects to the mischief. One was the fraud, the mislabeling, and the second was the fact that too much of the horse meat that was supplied came from horses that weren't being properly looked after. So you need to have two things. You need to have proper labelling so that everybody knows what is on offer, and if to the extent that horses are being used for this purpose, they have to be properly looked after, as most cattle are.
Alex, can I borrow Michael's microphone? You've got one. Sorry, you have. I can give it back. Alex, would you like to add to that?
Well, I would probably say that I'm just an average consumer in this debate, because other than what I've read in the newspapers and watched on television, I don't really know much about this, and a lot of what I've heard today is very new to me and extremely interesting. And I agree with Lord Howard that I'm not particularly against eating horse, and I'm sure a huge majority around the world aren't either, and it's very normal in a lot of places. But for me, and I guess for the normal consumer, it's more about the fact that we're being misled into it, and without the knowledge. And to be honest, what worries me more is this idea of all of the horrible defrosted beef going into the market. That worries me more.
Yeah, I don't think any of us will be looking for burgers during the lunch
as a
break
normal consumer
later on. Can I ask questions?
I was surprised to hear that the Tesco's and the others in this world aren't required to know where they're sourcing their food from. And in the financial world, you can't take on a client, you can't take money without going through money laundering rules, i.e. it's upon you, it's upon you to know that
Who would like to answer that? Should something be done to put pressure on the big supermarkets so they have a duty to know where their food comes from? Felicity.
Well, to be fair to them, what they would have said was that they had specified in their contracts a list of approved suppliers, and they would expect large manufacturing companies to stick to the contracts. But they are still and were negotiating every 12 weeks for those burger contracts. So there was a price haggle every 12 weeks. And I think that's the question. Are they actually using their market power in an abusive way that pushes the price so low that they ought to have known that people would be breaking contracts? It's very interesting to me also that none of them have sued. And I asked ABP, the big beef processor, whether they expected to be sued, and they said, well, what on earth would we be sued for? And I said, well, because you supplied them with horse. But they didn't think there was any possibility of that. And, you know, normally if you're in breach of contract in any other sphere, that's what would happen. My understanding is they've all reached private settlements, although they won't discuss them, and that those are being taken into account in future contracts, so that the price of the raw materials, they're getting them for even less. But meanwhile, the consumer upon whom the fraud was actually perpetrated has had no justice.
Do you want to add anything, Michael?
Well, presumably consumers too could sue. I imagine it wouldn't be easy to take on Tesco or any of the other big suppliers, I dare say, but in theory that would lie. I think to the extent that what's being suggested would require new regulation, it may be a question for the Minister later on.
Alex, do you want to add? No. You want to say something?
Well, just to respond to that, yes, if we were in America, consumers probably would find pro bono lawyers who'd bring a class action. It'd be a lovely idea if somebody could do that here. But of course, by the time it was uncovered, most of it had been eaten, so some consumer would have to prove that they bought it on a specific occasion. And coming from The Guardian, as I do, I thought it was the role of government and the authorities to pursue rather
we'll
than
hear
individual.
what the Minister has to say later on. I think there's a lady with a microphone towards the back, and then can we come to our sponsor? Yes.
My name is Anne Bowe. I'm from Ireland. I would just like to ask the panel, there seems to be an anomaly as regards horse meat, owning horses. I think there's a huge responsibility on horse owners to make sure that their horses are adequately in their lives. And there is something that it seems okay to ride a horse, but it's not all right to eat a horse. If that horse is humanely killed at the end of its day, then that's what we should be looking at. Now that's one thing, so people don't like to talk about the horse when it is going to die.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I wonder if we could just have questions. I appreciate we all want to have our say, but if you could just phrase a question.
But the anomaly that I'm putting across is that now with horses, if you have a horse and it gets a lot of bute or antibiotic, there's a stamp on the passport, so that's not allowed for human consumption. What's the problem there?
Well, now that the passports should be telling you whether or not the horse has had bute and therefore can enter the human chain, is there any problem? Any of you got an answer to that one?
Well, there does need to be honesty about how you dispose of horses. I absolutely agree. I think the difficulty is if they've been ridden for sport or pleasure, the chances are they're not going to be suitable, except early on in life. They are likely to have been treated and not be suitable for the food chain.
Well, I'd just add that much of the problem, I think, lies in other countries, and that poses obviously considerable questions of enforcement, even if those countries have the kind of laws that we would all like them to have, and which, on the whole, we have, although perhaps there's room for improvement. It still leaves the question of whether those laws would be adequately enforced in those countries.
Do you want to add to that?
Well, I agree with all that.
I mean, I think the difficulty that we all know is that if a vet does provide bute for a particular horse, in the past horse owners have simply given what they had to a horse they felt was in need, and that is a problem, whatever appears on the passport, one that will have no doubt to be considered by the veterinary profession as well as those making the changes to the rules. Gerald Corbett.
Yes. Oh, you just keep talking. Oh, okay. Back on the horse meat thing, the heart of it seems to be the interface between the consumer and the big supermarket chains. And the figure that astonished me was the fact that 29% of a Tesco's burger could be horse meat. And I just like to come at it from the point of view of the directors of Tesco's, because I'm sure a number of us here know a number of them, and they are not villains, and they would be astonished at that figure, that 29% of their burgers were horse meat. And I'd like to know what have they sort of done about it with their given their responsibilities, what changes have happened within Tesco, and then also from the point of view of Tesco's shareholders, who are huge UK institutions, typically pension funds. In fact, most of the people in this room indirectly will have shares in Tesco's. And what have they done about it? I think those are quite interesting angles of the thing from the director's point of view and their responsibilities, and from the big shareholders.
What have Tesco's done about this, and what have the shareholders done, if anything? Felicity.
Well, it's a very strange position for me to be in, to be defending Tesco, who have sued us in the past very aggressively. But let me have a go, even though they didn't answer most of my questions. Because no, of course they're not evil people, and they're trying to run a good business. I think they have tried to do a few things. They have talked about having a shorter supply chain and trying to source more British beef more directly. That actually is quite hard, because of course once you've let the national beef herd decline, you can't switch it back on. Animals don't work like that. It's a minimum of 3 years for the cycle from calf to fatted animal for slaughter, quite apart from investing in their own abattoirs and building up farm income so that people actually want to produce for them. And again, I can't really answer this because I haven't heard directly from them and they haven't told me. But what I'm hearing from industry is that they've made that commitment on the one hand at director level, and they've apologised, and I think they were very shocked. But on the ground, at buyer level, they're still negotiating 12-week contracts and pushing down prices. And there's this mismatch, not just with Tesco, but with the big retailers generally, where they might be saying one thing at board level, but if you don't make that part of your buyer's bonus structure, if the bonus structure is all about you get more money if you push the price down, you can't actually change things. And I don't see any sign of a fundamental change of the sort that would really improve things.
We're very nearly out of time, because coffee is an essential at this point. Michael, I can see you're bursting to say something very briefly.
Well, I wonder if it's permitted for me to ask Felicity a question. Felicity rightly rejected my suggestion that consumers might sue. Isn't it something that trading standards officers should get involved in?
Trading standards have very little money. You're dealing with a company with billions of pounds turnover. It falls to one trading standards authority, who is the home authority for Tesco, who's got a very small budget to take on this global giant. And I think if there is needed to be changes in regulation, that's a key thing. You know, is the enforcement structure we've got so anachronistic that actually it can't? I mean, how can a couple of small trading standards officers in a small local authority where Tesco happens to have its global headquarters in Cheshire actually take them on? I mean, it's not possible.
I'm going to have to, I'm afraid, bring this part of the discussion to a halt. It seems to have gone very quickly, and it perhaps inevitably has been dominated by the horse meat scandal, which might perhaps be something that we'll hear considerably more about later on when we have the panel discussion, which will include the minister who's responsible, not for the horse meat scandal, but for dealing with it now. But can I also say, just to remind you about the mini presentations later, there is indeed one in the Education Centre at 2:40 on what World Horse Welfare has done in relation to this matter, so another reason to go to the mini presentations later on. Now, we are very pushed on time. It is time for a short break and some coffee, but could I ask, please, that everybody be back here in their seats at 25 past 11 so that we can start promptly at 11:30. Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. Well done, Anne. Thank you.
Brilliant job.
Is that okay?
Yeah, brilliant.
Well, I got there.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Thank you. You can take that one from the side. Free used, I think. Yeah, just leave those. Shall I read some more? Yes, please, if that's all right. Okay, fresh. Yeah, lovely. Thank you.
was going to just call you up.
Oh, that was my question.
Yes.
Shall I call them?
Yes. I'll call you up, introduce you, and then you do that.
Okay.
That's all right. Later. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back, and full marks to those who were back at the time we decided. We may have to speed up a little bit, but I'm going with great pleasure straight away to introduce Professor Derek Knottenbelt, who's going to speak about the future of the working horse.
Your Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to do this. It's a fantastic meeting, this, because it's a little bit of everything for everybody. I think that's an unusual kind of a meeting. It really is. And so thank you very much for inviting. It's good to be here. My remit was really to talk about the future of horsepower, or the working horse. And I think I've become, over the last 35 or 40 years, more and more involved in this to try to understand the role of the working horse stroke donkey. We're going to use horse and donkey generically here, so please excuse me if I show you a picture of a donkey and I talk about a horse and vice versa. So what makes the ideal employee? Some years ago, I was invited to go and talk to a group of company directors. And I couldn't understand what on earth this was all about. Why should they want to talk to me of all people? I didn't do that. Anyway, I just thought I would do a straw poll amongst them and find out what they took on as being the ideal characteristics of an employee. What was the best characteristics of an employee that these guys could think of? They were all allowed to name 2 of them. And here are some of them. There's the survey. Reliable, honest, hardworking, willing, undemanding, obedient to a fault, uncomplaining and non-litigious, that was a very important one, minimal pay demands, that was inevitable, available 24/7, 365, no Christmas Day, green credentials, it was important to some of them, teetotal and non-smoker for obvious reason, and interestingly, one person said, guide you home safely when you've had a skinful. And I thought, where do we find this ideal employee? And actually, this is the ideal employee. Here they are. This is the ideal employee because that's what they do. They work honestly, they work faithfully, they're there 24/7, they're green, they poo out one end, grow the grass and eat it on the other. It all happens. So it's a very, very good way of looking at these little animals that are working to the betterment of the societies in which the people live. So these are the employees. Oh, that's not going. So where is the horse now? Well, we all know where the horse is now. From our end, we know. You only have to look at the Olympics, you only have to look at the big eventing things, the big race meetings and so on. We know where our horses are. There's a spectrum, of course, that ranges from the very elite horses at any discipline right the way down to the little kid's Shetland pony that's inevitably rugged up and fat, as we heard earlier on. That's okay, it doesn't matter, actually. Well, it does matter, but nonetheless. But actually, there's another side to this. There's the opposite end of the world, where the horses that we have are pleasure horses and leisure horses, things we derive pleasure from. This is my Ferrari. No. I was going to say it's my Ferrari, but it isn't. But it's a Ferrari, you know, and a tractor. You know, that's where we are. We've got buses, you know, and we've got cars. So I'd just like to put this equation to you, that this is our world here, that we live in, polluted, rusting to hell. When a van dies by the roadside, it just rusts and decays away for 1,000 years. Some of them are going to be there for 1,000 years. You know, these kind of things, they carry a lot, I agree. But they consume carbon fuel and they pollute the environment. What about these little guys here? Can't even see the donkey underneath here. He's pulling this enormous load. And you can see that, you know, they're working hard. And when he dies, he lies in the ditch for a few days. He swells up and bursts and smells for a week. The hyenas and the crows and one thing and another eat it. And it goes back to the earth and there's nothing left afterwards. You know, so you have to say, which side of this equation is good for the world in the future? You know, it's this side, actually, that's good for the world in the future, even although there are major welfare concerns that are related to their work, and that's where we come in, that's where our role has to be. So this is when these two worlds collide. You know, there's an interesting, from a science fiction movie, as you can imagine. There was a guy sitting on here, apparently, and he survived. So that's all right, as you can see. But, you know, this is the kind of thing that we've got to try to look at. This is our side here. This is our kind of world where we use our animals for pleasure and leisure. But, of course, you know, we do tend to forget there's another side of the equation, and we are exploiting a lot of other societies that we live in. And here's this one here, and you can see he's got BMW on the front here, look. See, which I thought was very smart. And he was very proud of his horse, and there was another little one that had a little Mercedes-Benz sign that he'd no doubt nicked from some big Mercedes somewhere in town. So that was all very exciting. But these guys had some inherent pride in their animals, and they wanted them to do well. But that's not always the case. There is a conflict between what is cruel and what is cruelty, and we'll come back to that in a moment. The horse has served us well in our time. We still use it now as a leisure item, and we still respect and protect it for the most part. I know we've heard about bad end of things and the cruelty cases that we have in this country and so on, and across the civilized world or the developed world. It's not like that, okay? There are side issues to it, but for the most part, we are content with we're at peace with our animals. I think we are, because we have legislation that goes with it. However, there's another side to the equation, and the horse still serves a functional role now. This is no longer a pleasure or leisure thing. This is simply the white van. It's the motor car, it's the bicycle, it's the form of transport, it's the means of creating family wealth, or at least family survival. And we need, therefore, to generate the respect for the working animal, and we need to protect it. Now, where we protect, all very well us saying in the United Kingdom here, we must protect all the working animals, and there mustn't be any thin animals pulling carts, and there mustn't be an animal with a wound on it pulling a cart, and there mustn't be a lame horse pulling a cart or pulling a plow. That's not the real world. You know, if these animals die, the children don't go to school, and or the family may not even survive. And where is the sense in that? Is that acceptable to you or not, that a 6-year-old child has to forget school and carry water because A, she has no donkey, or B, because the donkey has died of a preventable disease like tetanus? So I think there are side issues to this that we have to agree amongst ourselves. We know that starvation, overwork that we all look at in these animals is desperate. And you can look at these animals here. They're in desperate condition, and they're having to work extremely hard. However, we also have to say, why is that? These are a result of poverty, necessity, and ignorance. It is not a problem of cruelty. This is not cruelty. Cruelty is what we have in this country when we know better. This is cruel, I agree. But we have to accept that the cruel is applying to the people as well. Their lives are cruel by comparison to ours. So it's all a matter of interpreting the circumstances under which they live. So where will we be in 2027? Well, I know where I'll be. I'll be down there shoveling coal, that's for sure. In 2027, I believe that there will be countless more working animals, not less. It's easy to say that we should take all these animals and protect them and give them a machine. Tell me honestly, does the world need 200 million more petrol-guzzling machines? It does not. We are trying to get electric cars to do it with. We don't want a petrol-guzzling machine even ourselves. We want an electric car because we want to look after the environment. So a donkey is green. A horse is green by definition. So, you know, we have to recognize that oil and other transport mechanisms are not going to be available. There's no question. And there's no way that this little guy here is going to have a hydrogen car with non-polluting environment. He's not going to do that, not for the next 10 centuries, I don't believe. And so I think we're going to have very many more families reliant on working horses of one sort or another. So the welfare challenges that we face for this length of time, you know, climate change is happening, crop yields are changing over the world, there's a spread of tropical disease, not least of which to the animals themselves, globalization, shortage of grain crops, all these kind of things, which mean that the working horse is going to gain in its value to the owners, not go down, even although they perceive, oh, I'd rather have a tractor or I'd rather have a car than a donkey. They don't see they envy, they don't see the advantage in what they're doing. It's us where the problem lies, I believe. We're not addressing this issue. I would buy my milk from a milkman who came round with a cart and clink, 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 clip, clop down the road. I'd dash out and buy my milk from him at the expense of going to the supermarket and getting it for 10p cheaper. I would prefer to do that because it's somehow natural to me to do that. Fact is, we don't have that anymore. So the welfare problems won't go away. We know that. We need strategies to improve welfare. We need to gain respect from owners of horses in these countries, and we need to embed welfare as part of this deal. There's no question about that. We have to embed the welfare, not by gratuitous criticism, but simply by educational policy, and education is the most fundamental part of all this. So how do we do this? Well, we've got to try to encourage empathy for the animals. People need to understand that animals are sentient, you know, and we all know that, but people out in the developing world don't see that equation. You know, they treat them badly, not because they want to, but because they don't know any better. And I think that this is an issue that we have to understand from our end before we start waving big sticks at people and start criticizing them gratuitously. These are the kind of people we're trying to help. You know, look at them. They're wonderful people. They're great people with sunny smiles and great happy lives. They work so hard, and they want to do better for themselves, and they want to do better for their children. This is a veterinary surgeon working for Spana in Mali, and this just shows you that we all feel empathy for animals. That guy loves this donkey. He has an empathy with the animal, doesn't he? You can see that just by looking at the picture. He didn't know I was taking it, so it wasn't a posed picture, but you can see that. People want to do better. So owning a donkey also releases women and children from burden, because if their family doesn't have a donkey, the women and children have to take the donkey work. That's the way life is out there, I'm afraid. The donkey will improve the family's income by up to 500%. We know that's a figure that is now well established. It adds to community responsibility, and it improves the status of vets with equine experience, because they are then seen as an added benefit to the society. If the donkey's sick, take it to the vet. Vet fixes donkey, donkey starts working, children go to school, family 500% better off. It's an equation that's extremely easy to understand. This is the kind of thing we face, and it's easy to look at this and criticize it and say, this animal is working too hard, he's carrying too heavy a load. It is too heavy a load, I have to agree. But the fact is, this has been going on for years, and somehow, rather than criticize it, we have to try to say, well, hang on a minute, you know, can we find a strategy to try to make this a bit better? Can we try to educate people to make them better? This is a little Gary horse here pulling a taxi, and you can see there's hordes of people on the back of it. Little guy working his heart out for his owner. Reliable, honest, straightforward, green, all the credentials. Same here, same here. The horse and donkey generate secondary industries within these communities, and you can see here's a farrier, and he makes his own shoes out of angle iron and reinforcing iron, and he makes his own nails. Why? Because there isn't any nails. There's no good sending him a box of Musto, you know, stainless steel nails, because he wouldn't know what to do with them. He just made his nails. But does he look unhappy about his life? I don't think so. He looks happier than a lot of us, I would suggest, perhaps, in our lives, certainly me. So, what stops animals from working? Well, it's the obvious things. It's disease, it's injury, and it's malnutrition. We do these people no service by gratuitous, ill-informed criticism, by failing to understand the conditions under which they have to live and work, by failing to grasp the extent and the implications of the poverty in which they live, by failing to recognize their necessities. They want their culture. They don't want to have our kind of world. They want their kind of world, but they would like that to be just a little bit better. And we also do them no service by failing to recognize their dignity and pride in what they do. So when we go out there and we start ranting and railing at them, we're going to get nowhere. That's how to build barriers, not bridges. So what do we need to do? We need to understand their circumstances and the customs and their challenges that those offer us and to the people themselves. You can't kill a horse You can't euthanize a horse if it's owned by particular kinds of religious groups. They have to be taken by God. Well, you know, that's fine, and it's no good going there and saying, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to cut the animal's throat, or I'm going to give it a bullet or whatever. It's not going to do that. That is an insult to them, absolutely. So you have to sit down quietly, as many people will know, I mostly buy them, and for exorbitant cost, and then put them down. And then somebody says, oh, is that your horse that you just put down? I don't want it there. Take it away. How am I going to take it away, you know? And then they say, well, you know, I'll take it away if you pay me for it. So I pay him to take it away again. So something wrong here somewhere, as my wife will very readily tell you. Okay, so we need to provide support for individuals. We need to provide support for teams of people working in these countries. And we need to educate the children, the users, the vets, the technicians, and the decision makers. We need to have targeted strategies for humane interventions for preventable disease, in particular tetanus. Why is a donkey allowed to die of tetanus in Mali? You know, it's just inconceivable to me that this is allowed to happen in this world. We need to understand about harness, we need to understand dental care and farriery, things that we need to look at, but at the same time, we need to understand the circumstances under which these people are living. Classroom working, I beg your pardon, classroom learning won't work on its own. Railing against welfare compromise simply fails, and patronizing authoritative approaches are resented very strongly by these people. They can't see rid of you quick enough. You know, they want rid of you if that's what you're going to do. So why support the vets? Well, I'm particularly concerned for the education of young vets, because there's a general trend now not to offer veterinary treatment amongst the welfare organizations across the world, not only the British ones, but all of them. Don't bother, because it's not sustainable. But there is a really serious reason why we need to do this. We need to offer primary veterinary care, not because you make a big difference, but because you enhance the professional integrity and professional enthusiasm of the people involved. And that's a fundamental part of gaining the understanding and respect in the community for animals. So we need to provide these people, these clinics and various places with sophisticated diagnostic equipment, sophisticated surgical equipment, and sophisticated training. Their animals deserve exactly the same as our animals deserve. In truth, it's no good telling them that they can't have a colic surgery. What we've got to try to do is to understand that the circumstances probably precluded for one reason or another, but that the vets need to be able to understand that that's possible, and we need to lead them into that. Otherwise, we push the vets down and we keep them down in 1945 while we go on to 2027. And that's patronizing and completely and utterly wrong, in my opinion. Sustainability is not available in a bottle. You can't just buy sustainability. Sustainability requires respect of communities. And that means that we have to respect the community has to respect the vet has to respect the animal has to respect the owner. And so it goes round and round, and then suddenly the equation is closed, the circle is completed, and we will have an improved equine welfare respect for the animals that we're dealing with. So why should we provide this quality of veterinary treatment? The animals deserve it just like ours. The respect for veterinary surgeons in the community is fundamental to the recognition of animal welfare. If the vets say something and they respect the vet, they listen. They don't listen to me, they listen to their own vets. I'm going to try to train the vet to be respected. And once he is respected, we will find that there will be significant improvements in animal welfare. The vets need the job satisfaction so that we hold them in the situation. We don't want fly-by-night vets coming in and working for the welfare organizations. In this week, out next week, in this week, out in 2 years' time. We don't want that. We want people to make a career of it, just like we all want to make careers of our jobs. This man wouldn't have changed. I mean, this man would not have changed if the vets hadn't been there. He's a horse with a little donkey with a saddle saw. Here's his saddle saw. This is the vet which we were talking about earlier on, Amadou Doumbia. And he's explaining to the owner how the saddle is chafing the animal's back. And he's put his saddle pack here, and then he sets it on fire, which I thought was a very good lesson because he couldn't use it again. And then he gave him a very nice fitted one and a few little red tablets. And the red tablets did the trick because it gained respect. And as soon as that happened, this man had changed completely. Working animals are here to stay. Many millions of people totally rely on them. They're a sustainable resource. They do no environmental damage. And if you care, you have to be involved. The World Horse Welfare, the charities, Spana, a donkey sanctuary, Brook, we all care. And it's time we showed our care by doing the right thing. And that means that we have to all combine together to do this. And I would commend this philosophy to you, and I hope that the Working Horse Colloquium next year is going to be a real stunning success. So that's where I'm hoping there will be a big change. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, many thanks to Professor Nottenbelt. That was very thought-provoking and certainly changed my approach to looking at some of the more challenging pictures that we see. Clearly, we can't improve the lot of the animals without improving the lot of the people too, and that was a very clear message. Thank you. We're going to move straight on now to the discussion panel forum. I just say, in the light of what we've just heard, that World Horse Welfare are going to give one of the mini presentations this afternoon on how it's helping working horses in the map room at 2:10. So a further reason to stay on after the formal proceedings are finished and after you've had some lunch to go to the mini presentation. But now it's time for our discussion panel forum, and I'm going to introduce our panel chairman. Probably doesn't need an introduction. It's Philip Ghazala, a well-known television commentator and, of course, the lead commentator for FEI TV. Philip.
Thank you very much indeed. Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, may I first of all invite the panel forum to come to the stage. Thank you. We've had one slight change from the programs that you have, as you may well have noticed, and I'm very pleased to say a special thank you and a hello to Jenny Rudel, because unfortunately Suzanne Dando is unwell and was unable to join us today, and she sends her apologies, and we send our best wishes to Suzanne. Jenny is one of those fortunate people who has a job of work that encompasses her hobbies and her passions. And Jenny is also a BHS instructor and trainer, and she asked me to specifically say that because she did not want to come across as a blonde bimbo. Her words, not mine. Jenny is best known for her work on Horse and Country TV, and with the exposure Jenny has to the world of equestrianism, she's perfectly placed to respond to the questions being posed today. I mentioned that there are details of the glittering careers of our panelists in the programme. I'd just like to enlarge on a couple of them. Lord de Morley left the Royal Wessex Yeomanry in 2005, having achieved the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. I did try to research the Minister's National Hunt riding career. Although I was not able to find any statistical information, I am reliably informed that on riding his 4,000th winner, AP was heard to say that his achievements would not have been so significant had Mr. Rupert Ponsonby not changed his focus from race riding to food and beverage. We will be having some questions from the floor if there's time, and we are running a little bit late. But one other note about the Minister. Could you please, if you wouldn't mind, if you have any questions regarding badges, keep them to lunchtime. I've had the good fortune to work with Anna at several international horse shows in her work. Anna is here due to her personal successful globe-trotting career as an international endurance rider. Anna still competes at the highest level in the sport of endurance. And selectors, please note, Anna Williams, it says here, repeat name twice, Anna Williams has her sights set to represent Great Britain at next year's Alltech FEI World Equestrian Games in Normandy. Ian's equestrian prowess and many medal successes at championship level in eventing is known to us all. Some may not know of Ian and his wife Jenny's sterling involvement in working with children and adults with special needs. Ian and Jenny offer life-changing opportunities to referrals from councils, schools and foster homes, and they have incorporated specialist RDA facilities at their new equestrian centre near Selkirk. And Ian was telling me over coffee just now that they're literally moving in as we speak, so he's out of the way. In 2010, Mr. Ian Stark, MBE, OBE, became the first equestrian outside racing to be inducted into the Scottish Sports Hall of Fame. Ian's name sits, and I'm sure proudly, alongside such greats as Sir Che Blythe, Sir Matt Busby, and Sir Jackie Stewart. You may have spotted there is a title inconsistency, if anyone is able to help. We have 5 pre-requested questions for our panel, and as I mentioned earlier, if time allows, we will move on and ask for some other questions at the end. I'm just going to turn the clock back for a few minutes. If I may ask Graham Duncanson, practicing vet from the Westover Veterinary Centre in Norfolk, if you'd like to pose this question. Sir.
I'd like to ask for the second time, so we're turning the clock back, whether any good has come out of the horse meat crisis.
Thank you very much indeed. Minister, I think you're in line to answer that first.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for advance notice of your question. And before I start, I might preface my words by saying that I'm the Animal Welfare Minister, and I'm coming at things very much from that angle. I think, first of all, for those of us who are concerned about the welfare of horses, one good thing about all of this is that it's put the spotlight on it. I think many people have tried to avoid talking about what happens to unwanted horses, and it's forced us to do that. I think people have regarded slaughtering as a humane way of dealing with a sick or injured horse that would otherwise have suffered. And what we've now seen is that there are quite a lot of people who see horses as food. Secondly, I think it will teach us all to think much more carefully about what we're eating. Professor Elliott is yet to complete his study into the food system, but that's a very important piece of work for us. The whole area of food labelling is being shaken up, and we heard a bit about that this morning. And the EU's involvement in all of that is extremely important, because it's certainly a problem which goes much wider than just this country. And we, of course, are cooperating very closely with them, and in many cases leading the way. Thirdly, it's focused attention on passports and identification. The statutory purpose of passports is to protect the food chain and human safety, but those of us who love horses have, I think, reasonable hope that it will also have benefits for horse welfare. And in that regard, I really do welcome what World Horse Welfare and the Equine Sector Council do, and they provide us with invaluable advice and help. Perhaps one of the root causes of all of this, I think, is in overbreeding, and it's a really complex area, and it's one which I'm looking at very closely, and I've asked the Equine Sector Council to come and meet me specifically to talk about this.
Ian, we've all been aware, obviously, of the hype surrounding this, and you've been in the equestrian world as a professional for a long time. What are your thoughts on some of the good things that may have come out of the awareness?
Well, I think we've been sort of quite negative in looking at the depressing side of it all. Personally, I have no problem with people eating horse meat, and I have no problems with horses being slaughtered for human consumption. But I think the biggest problem, as you've touched on, is there's overbreeding, and horses are so inexpensive to buy that people are sort of hoarding them as you would rubbish in the house. And probably what we need, and I think the Princess Royal did touch on this earlier, is that we need a way out. It used to be that if we had a horse that we needed disposed of, for want of a better description, we went to the local hunt. They're now not so keen to have them. There's regulations there. And to dispose of a horse costs at least £200, if not more, depending on which part of the country you're in. And a lot of the people that are accumulating horses have no way out, and we need to find some market, some way out for them. And I'm not suggesting that the World Horse Welfare funds an abattoir for horses, but we should be able to, in some way, the negative side for me is that the Cheshire abattoir that closed, it was serving a very good purpose, and although we've heard a lot of negative things, they did actually take a lot of horses that were well looked after and taken to the abattoir, and they were humanely disposed of, and I have actually witnessed that personally. So it's disappointing for me that they've closed, not because of the problems that they had, but it's disappointing that they've closed, and we now have no way out for these people with all the horses. So the World Horse Welfare has to carry the burden, and other federations like them have to carry the burden of looking after these unwanted animals, and I think if we had somewhere specific, it would make life a lot easier.
Thank you, Ian. Anna, you travel the world competing, and passports is a vital part of your equipment. You can't actually go anywhere without the passports for your horses or compete anywhere. In your travels, do you ever come across any passport issues? Because we've talked about passports being such a key assistance to actually sorting some of these issues out.
Yes, there certainly are various issues with the passports, and as we heard this morning, I think if this passport issue was taken slightly more under control and we did find a solution of passporting all of these horses, we'd be very far from the situation that we see nowadays, where we do see the horses travelling under the covert of darkness, if you like, where we're not aware of just the movement of all of these horses. I live in Switzerland, where there is a big horse meat market, and in actual fact the government plays a huge role in monitoring all of the horses. Every year we receive a visit at home from the government who takes note of how many horses we have. The horses are registered on a central system, and you cannot export a horse without going to the Chamber of Commerce and having a particular paper. There is no movement of horses out of the country or within the country that the government is not aware of.
Lessons to be learned, perhaps. Jenny, you're travelling with a camera around the countryside, and I know that you're focusing mainly on the top end of the sports horse, but do you come across situations where you sort of cock an eye thinking, I wonder what's going on here?
I think until I got involved with Horse and Country TV, I was just your average horse trainer, horse hugger, if you like. And then when you get involved with things like Horse and Country TV, you get to come to conferences like this. I've been here for a few years now. And until I came to conferences like this, I didn't know about the transport issues and the problems that went on behind the scenes, excuse me. So I think, obviously, travelling around the country, you meet all these people, they don't actually know what's going on. So the good thing that has come out of this scandal is it's massively highlighted the videos that were shown earlier, the problems that are going on. So yes, it's a terrible thing that's going on, but at least now that people know about it, because I didn't know about it before. I didn't know about the horse transport problems. So I think if any good has come out of it, people are now knowing and hopefully signing petitions and helping with the problems.
Minister, communication then, as Jenny's just referred to, is obviously a key part of getting the message out there. Is that something that DEFRA, is that top of their agenda, to get the message out there?
Yeah, and I think we'll come on to talk a bit more about that, but very much education and helping people to understand what is the best and right way. Derek actually referred to education is a solution to a lot of problems, and not just in this country.
Just coming to the end of the first question, this year we've done something slightly different, where I've actually spoke to Rowley to get the views of the World Horse Welfare, because that's not something that's been done before. And I just wanted to read a couple of notes to you. Has any good come out of this year's horse meat scandal? In short, yes, is the short answer from World Horse Welfare. But in particular, it has shone a spotlight on the murky trade in the so-called low-value horses around Europe. And of course, we've heard that discussed through several of the discussions this morning. And the systematic failings in the system to properly identify horses, something we've been warned about for years. But I think the key message from everything that we've heard today, and I still think there's an awful lot to do, and we all agree with that, is that we're on the case, is really what it boils down to, and work is being done to address it. And I have to say that it's a very rare situation in life where I spend a great deal of time talking about food, but it doesn't make me feel hungry. We'd now move on to the second question, and I'd like to ask Mrs. Dee Dee Wilson, who's a World Horse Welfare volunteer from Wimbledon, if she'd be kind enough to ask a question. Thank you.
Okay, my question follows on very nicely from the last question and can develop from there. And the question is, are there any common horse care practices in the UK that should be changed or stopped in the next decade?
Thank you very much indeed, Dee Dee. That, of course, is a very wide-ranging subject. Jenny, we're going to come to you first for that.
Thank you for that, the broadest topic you could give me. I think, first of all, putting my training hat on and going to so many yards, the Princess Royal touched upon it earlier. I think we're almost being cruel by being kind. I go to many yards at the moment, and the temperatures drop below 10 degrees and a bit of rain's come out, and suddenly all the horses are in boxes wearing 5 rugs, still being given 5 scoops of competition mix, and then their owners wonder why Lightning's bucking his way around the arena when he comes out to being ridden, and they come to me as a trainer saying, can you help me with my horse because he's going mental in the field? And I think due to lack of turnout or the cost of horses nowadays, people are scared to turn their horses out and let them get a little bit wet, or scared to let them go in a field with another horse. When I was growing up, mares went in one field, geldings went in the other. Now my horses are in a field far away from another horse because of the fear of getting kicked, and I see these horses, Welsh cob crosses, turned out booted up to the eyeballs, never getting to talk to another horse with 4 rugs on. I mean, I don't know what these people are going to do when it actually does get cold. And I think they don't realise, and they think they're following in some of the top equestrians' footsteps by well rugging, but what they don't realise is some of the top horses are without an inch of fat on them, and very in top competition, or as I just said to Jane Holderness-Rotham here, we were having a rant about it, she's just turned all her horses out for the winter. They don't realise that horses can live out overnight. And they're not treating horses as individuals. They see you can buy 10 rugs, so they buy them. They see all the different types of feed you can buy, and it's competition mix with everything in it that you must have. So they're feeding these things to their horses. They don't realise that it doesn't matter if it's the same breed or a thoroughbred. Some thoroughbreds do really well with just a handful of chaff and living out all year round. And so then this runs on to the biggest problem, and I think World Horse Welfare know it, is obesity. And by doing all these things and putting them in a box for 23 hours a day and hacking them once a week, they're getting fatter and fatter and fatter, and then other problems, I'm sure vets will know more than me, laminitis comes on at the age of 15, where they never even thought that horse would get laminitis. So I think by being kind, we're actually being cruel, and I think we're one step away from putting radiators in boxes.
Funny you should say that, because I was going to ask you, do you think we're humanising horses? Do you think
Massively. I often say, as I walked into my yard and some lovely girl straight out of college, I was like, why has my horse got a massive turnout rug and 3 under rugs on? She was like, well, I thought she was cold. I was like, well, no, you're cold. She's not cold. She's fine. And, oh, they don't like the rain. Well, if you never put them out in it, how do you know? I think we don't like the wet, we don't like the cold, so therefore our horses can't. And some of them have never been out in the rain, so yes, they're not going to like it, and they're going to stand in the at the gate going, please can I come in, because I know I've got a whole massive hay net in there, which is far more preferable to going in the mud. But they're horses at the end of the day, and they're hardy, and if you let them be horses, they will be horses.
Ian, you've obviously kept horses for a great many years. I don't mean that rudely, but experience-wise. Husbandry in horses, it's obviously changed even whilst you've been involved. How have you sort of coped with it and then got yourself back to a level that, hold on, I must do the right thing here?
Well, I think, excuse me, I think horses, like us, are all individuals, and I'm one that actually likes lots of rugs on and coats on because I'm a complete wimp in the cold. Whereas if you go to Newcastle of an evening, some of the ladies that go clubbing, on the other hand, I'm not so sure. I think we have a problem really with all the advertising and the new products that come on the market. There's a lot of people that have horses out there that think, well, there's a new additive out, I'd better use it. And you know, my favorite riders advertising it or supporting it said, you know, we're encouraging people all the time to get a little bit over the top with their horses and ponies. And my belief is that, yes, you need knowledge, but keep it simple, keep it basic. If you're feeding ordinary basic rations, the chances are they've got everything in there that the horse is going to need. And your eye is your merchant. You look at your horse and you decide it's not looking well enough, you give it more food. It's too fat, you give it less food. If you can't ride it, you stop feeding it. If it's lazy, give it more oats. I mean, it's really practical common sense. And I think quite a lot of it we're sort of led by the advertising.
Practical common sense to you, because your experience. And the Minister was talking about education just now. I mean, is it, Minister, too easy to own a horse?
Well, Philip, we were talking, as you say, about education. And when I first got involved in horses, or rather ponies as it was then, there was the Pony Club. And indeed, there is still the Pony Club. Wonderful institution. But I think what we're seeing is, with the popularization of horses, is people coming to horse ownership much later in life. And the Princess Royal spoke about that earlier. For myself, I don't think we should think that's a bad thing. I think we should welcome them, but we have to realize that they need to learn some of the things that some of us learnt from really experienced people much earlier in life. And we've got to find ways of doing that. Perhaps there should be a pony club for grown-ups. Or I certainly think that people should be learning a lot more from their vets and their farriers than they do at the moment, and perhaps we should be encouraging our vets and farriers to be a bit more forthcoming and helpful. At the moment, maybe some think I'll do what I'm being asked to do, but it's not my job to go a step further. I think our wonderful specialist horse press can help us in getting the word out. And experienced horse people should be helping less experienced horse people, and I think a lot of us can do a lot to help in that regard.
Thank you. Anna, one of the comments from World Horse Welfare is we need to take a longer-term view in any assessment of horse care practices. For example, we would say a horse should have access to pasture in the course of a year, possibly through a period of layoff. What's your view about the turning out of horses and the stabling of horses, and particularly those in work?
I think we're all well aware that a horse craves routine, and a horse requires the stability of its daily routine. And I do firmly believe that a daily routine ideally should involve some turnout in pasture. We've spoken earlier today about how it should be natural for a horse, and we really don't want to arrive at the situation, as the Princess Royal said, that the horses will look at the grass and say, oh, no idea what that is. That's really not where we want to arrive. That said, I know that there are a high number of competition horses that do not get turnout. And Jenny, you mentioned earlier about the individuality of horses, and perhaps what's suitable for one horse is not suitable for all horses. You know, we see the fat Shetland ponies rugged up who it's not suitable for them to be out all day on pasture, because then we do reach the process of laminitis, as we spoke about before. But no, for me, pasture is very important, but equally stabling is important. Our horses rely on us to help them out, and they do at times need shelter from the rain, and yes, whilst they all need to be exposed to the elements at times, there are situations where we need to step in and make sure we look after them.
Jenny, in your work with Horse and Country TV, do you feel there is a responsibility with that media environment that you've got to assist to educate people? Because it is very easy to go out and buy a horse, and one of the speakers earlier mentioned that somebody buys a horse and reads a book and thinks they invented the horse 24 hours later. Do you work on that kind of sort of assistance with people who've, you know, recently owned a horse and trying to teach them through the channels of the media to actually look after them properly?
Oh, massively. It's something I hugely want to happen more and more. So we have our own advice section where we have top riders who people can write into us, and then we pose the question to the suitable top rider. And I think the problem, and the Princess Royal did touch upon it as well, the internet is hugely at fault, because there's all these forums and these people very sweetly write in saying, I've got my horse turned out, should it be wearing a rug? And then they end up with a barrage of abuse from other armchair experts telling them that they must wear 4 rugs, or they must do this and they must do that. So hopefully, especially with Horse and Country TV, it is somewhere people can write in asking for advice, and we don't just rant at them, we give them advice, and then we open it up to the social media. And we monitor that, so people can then give their advice from outside as well. And then we say to them, you are only allowed to give this advice if it's sensible, and we monitor it. But at the same time, they're getting advice from the top riders, and we really, really encourage it, because, as you say, people do buy horses and seem to not have a clue what they're doing, and ask their best mate, and they tell them what they're doing. That might not be suitable for that horse as an individual. So, yeah, I do think it is a massive part of what we do as a TV channel, that we're advising people in the best way we can.
So if you see a forum or something like that, then somebody's giving what they believe to be correct advice, but it isn't, is it possible for someone to actually do anything about that? Not liking forums is one of my pet subjects, by the way, because yes, they drive me crazy. But can one do something about that?
I think some forums are monitored, so derogatory things can be deleted, but I think this is one of the biggest problems. People get abusive on them. One lovely lady I saw had written on a forum, my horse has just been clipped, does he need a rug? And the abuse she got back was, of course he does, you stupid woman. Whereas she was genuinely asking for help, rather than giving her help and advising her on what type of rugs and how long he should be out in the field, or should he come in with his breeding, or asking questions about the horse. She then got abuse because people say, oh, you're not looking after your horse properly. Well, in my eyes, the fact she was asking meant she wanted to look after her horse properly. So, no, they're not regulated. So hopefully people feel by writing to us and just asking the question and then looking on our website for advice is far better than going to a forum where people are just on a bit of a kind of bandwagon. And as I said before, armchair experts.
Yeah. Ian, I know you had something you wanted to say.
Yeah, it may sound a bit frivolous, but just sometimes there's conflicting stories, and you can relate this to horses or not, but only yesterday I read in one of the tabloids about the free-range chickens, and we've all been sort of going out and buying our eggs that are free-range because we think it's better. And now the latest research is that the chickens in the cages are actually less stressed, so we should change our views.
At that point, I think we'll move on to the next question. Thank you, Ian. May I ask Sarah Underwood, participant volunteer from the Riding for the Disabled Association, for the next question. Thank you.
How valuable is horse riding or horse contact as a therapy for people with disabilities or special needs?
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Before I put the question to Ian, I want to just quote Winston Churchill. There's something about the outside of a horse that is good for the inside of man. Ian, you've been very involved, as I said at the beginning, in this area. Tell us about some of your experiences, because I know you have some wonderful stories.
Well, horse riding or horse contact as a therapy is has gone on for centuries and centuries. It's nothing new. The Riding for the Disabled Association, there is no doubt they have done an enormous amount over the years, and as well as having various individual people coming to our centre, we have an RDA group, and so I witness daily the effects that horses in contact have on people with all sorts of physical and mental disabilities. So I think there's masses to be learned there, and whilst I'm not one that would give horses human feelings, there is a word for it and it's gone at the moment, but I do believe that horses and ponies, when you watch them, and on a match, it's not. There we go. I'm not going to repeat it because I'm going to get it wrong. Anyway, watching the horses and ponies, there is no doubt that they assess the situation that they're dealt with, and I've had horses and ponies that can be quite tricky with some riders who think they know more, and yet you put on someone with a disability or an illness or whatever, and the horses relax and they almost look after these people. I do find it fascinating, and we've had a lot of people referred from different foundations, and it's not just the RDA. There's a lot of foundations throughout the country that are dealing with therapy and for people with horses. But we had two, and I must tell you about these two 8-year-old boys at home, when we've been with us for 2 or 3 months now, and they're both in foster care, and one of them was the son of a couple who were, as punishment, they used to bite him, so he had bite marks all over his body, and as a result he was terrified of adults and very, very timid. And another boy who was the 4th child, and the mother loved the first 3 and hated this one, and so he suffered all sorts of mental and physical abuse. So these 2 boys were really, really slow and backward, and although they were 8, they had the mental age of 3 or 4. And within 3 or 4 months, these boys have, I mean, to watch the expression on their face, it's pretty moving and pretty emotional. And they have now joined society, as it were, and gone back to school, and are, almost back in civilization, having been out in the wilderness. And I think there's so much more that horses can do for people out there, and I think, although it's gone on for centuries, I think it's only going to get bigger and bigger as time goes on.
Minister, getting animals involved with people who are not so fortunate, it's a great campaign, isn't it?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of RDA and Horseback UK, and like probably many of us here today, I was absolutely gripped by the Paralympics, which I couldn't take my eyes off our Paralympic equestrians. Huge fan.
Anna, I know you've experienced the para riders as well, and it is, as Ian's just alluded to, it is very emotional. Tell us about some of your experience and what your thoughts are, perhaps of some of the neglected horses, something the World Horse Welfare are interested in. They're taking perhaps a neglected horse, can rehabilitate that into the RDA. So you have a win-win situation, as I say, for the whole, everyone benefits.
Yeah, I have to echo what the Minister said. The Paralympics are quite staggering, and some of our Paralympians are the most inspirational people I have ever met. The challenges that they face are just incredible, and I find it very, very humbling. And to then see them with the horses and what they're able to get out of horses is just incredible. And I do believe there is a mutual understanding that the difference you see in a horse when you do present them with someone that does perhaps have physical or mental disabilities, you almost see an understanding on the face of the horse. It's quite fascinating. And I really think it's hugely, hugely important. I don't know about anyone else here, but if I've had a bad day at work, there is nothing better than going back out to the barn and just spending time with the horses, not necessarily riding them, but just being around them. They have this real calming effect, certainly on me, and that has to be emphasised across the people that are experiencing any mental difficulties.
I heard a wonderful story. It's a story from several decades ago. We were talking about, Ian talked about how horses can be naturally gentle with young people or people that are not, fit, perhaps. And there was a stallion somebody had who was as far as the owners and the people looking after it were concerned, was very, very aggressive. So when they went into its stable, they would take a stick, hit it, get it to the back, and everything else. This stallion was out in a corral, and somebody looked up and saw their 2-year-old child crawling around the legs of this stallion. And all the stallion was doing was just sniffing it and talking to it and just playing with it would be the wrong word. But they were absolutely staggered that this, what they believed to be an aggressive animal, was actually treating this child as any parent might treat it. Is absolutely right. Do you ever come across these, these wonderful horses and the situations in your work?
I come across wonderful horses every day. The fact they put up with me, I'm quite impressed with. I just did the RDA Gala Awards. I was very privileged to cover that, and I met the rider who was the most improved participant, and it was a chap called Paul who'd suffered a stroke. And the best thing he said to me was a few months ago he couldn't stay on the toilet without people waiting for him to fall off, and now he's riding dressage tests. And he just said this one horse turned his life round, and now he's starting to walk and talk again. And I mean, that horse then went on to win the Best Pony Award as well. But I just think these stories these guys come out with is their horses are just phenomenal.
Ian, are there any, particular conditions where horses can help? I know you work with people with all sorts of different types of conditions, but are there any particular conditions where horses can be helpful?
I think most, to be honest. We have autistic children, with people suffering from MS and Huntington's, and just some mental and physical disabilities, and really children that have come from troubled backgrounds. So it's really from every possible aspect. And it's not just the riding. We do, for some of these kids, we do pony care days, and they come and they catch the ponies in the field and they groom them, and they don't necessarily want to ride. It's just the contact as much as anything. And it gives them, it teaches them so much. It improves their coordination, their balance, their strength, and it just makes them feel happier.
Minister.
Philip, we were talking earlier about education. I think I might just say, if you do have a 2-year-old child, I wouldn't encourage you to put it in a sand yard with a stallion. But on the same note, I can say that my racehorse, when he came home in the summer, and whenever I used to get him in, he'd never have more than one leg on the ground at a time. Whereas when my old mother went to get him in, she could lead him in on the end of the rope.
Yeah. It is extraordinary, isn't it? Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to question 4, and I'd like to ask Mr. Keith Chandler, practicing vet from Keswick Equine Vets, Inverness, and the immediate past president of the British Equine Veterinary Association. Mr. Keith Chandler.
Thank you. How serious are the current problems facing the international sport of endurance?
Thank you. Anna, I'm going to come to you first because you are a very experienced competitor, and the one thing I left out of my introduction was that although the selection for the team hasn't been made yet for the World Equestrian Games, you have in fact already qualified. So I congratulate you on that. But let's get back to the question. There are clearly have been issues recently in the sport of endurance. Tell us your views from a rider's point of view, how you feel about it.
Yeah, I think we're all very well aware of the publicity, the negative publicity that the sport has been receiving of late. And it's clear that we are facing some major challenges. What is also very clear is that the issues that we have been seeing, the reference to the doping and the injuries, there is now a global movement that no longer wishes to see this in the sport. There is a huge influx of people that are very much against this, and as we've seen with World Horse Welfare, that have brought to the front these issues. That thanks to this publicity, there are some changes that are now coming ahead. The sport has seen an immense growth over the last couple of decades, and as with any sport, rule changes are necessary when we see such rapid growth. I think the changes that have been implemented since 2005 do serve the vast majority of our sport to a very high level. But perhaps I could just share with you the stringent controls that we have to go through with our horses in the space of a competition. And there's something about endurance that is quite unique. Across all horse sports, the horses will have to go through veterinary controls prior to the event and sometimes during the event. What is interesting about endurance is that we go through those same controls at the end of a competition. So we can cover anything between 80 to 160 kilometers in one day. And if your horse is not past fit to continue at the end of those 160 kilometers, then you lose your ranking. And that is something that is quite unique to our sport. I think also with the growth that we've seen this emergence of professional outfits, if you like, that have been developed to specifically cater for owners of horses, and within that system you see this grade of you'll have your grooms, your rider, your trainer, and then your owner. And with that very obvious stage there are particular pressures that will be put on people, performance-related pressures. I would also like to say that the large majority of us competing in this sport are not part of those professional outfits. I mean, I have 1 or 2 horses that I compete at a time, and I serve as rider and trainer, and therefore I have perhaps the distinct advantage that prior to a competition I will plan out my race very specifically based on the training I've been doing with my horse, based on how I feel my horse is feeling at the time. And because I am rider, trainer, owner, within the race, if I feel that my horse isn't competing perhaps as I was expecting him, I can change my game plan and I'll listen to the horse. Whereas perhaps in some of these more professional outfits that we see, the pressure is such that riders are not able to make those decisions for themselves. So I think that's something, but I must reiterate that the vast majority of us competing in the sport are not part of those outfits.
And amateurs, the vast majority?
Yes, probably at a championship I would say that maybe 60 to 70% are amateurs. So when I say amateurs, I don't mean the level at which we're competing, but our livelihoods are not made from the sport. You know, we have other jobs beside that. You know, so there's a slightly different sphere, I would say, appearing. For me, I've always had this old ethos of to finish is to win. And I think we spoke about the education through the Pony Club, and we're very lucky in Great Britain to have this support structure from when you're a child all the way through, that ethos and the horse welfare is drummed into you from a very young age. And perhaps in some parts of the world we don't see that same support structure. So for me it's just as important that I finish a competition with a healthy, happy horse, and that I continue to finish competitions, not just one, but continually. And okay, if we come in ahead of others and we get a good score, then even better. I'm competitive, don't get me wrong, but never at all costs.
Ian, when you see a sport develop as rapidly in popularity as the sport of endurance has, is there an inevitability that there's going to be some hiccups on the way?
I suppose there's hiccups with everything, not just sport, with any walk of life, business or whatever. I hope that the FEI deals with the current situation quickly and effectively, and they can get through it all. It'll be interesting to see how they cope with it, but it is a very fast-growing sport, and there's a lot of people love it. I have to say I did have a go once at a 25-mile race in Windsor Park on a French stallion, and when it got to the 12.5-mile vet check, I have to say I was the only person in the entire place that was delighted with the words, "Sorry, but your horse cannot continue." Being a stallion, he got rather frisky about life, and I was in agony, so I was very, very happy, but that's digressing, sorry. Back to the topic. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to the outcome from the FEI. I think they have to be tough on this, but I hope that the sport grows and improves for it.
Thank you. The FEI's Endurance Strategic Planning Group, I think we have the chairman here today, has put forward some very sensible proposals. And Jenny, there's no question that the future is looking bright in terms of bringing everyone into line.
This is the one topic I was hoping you weren't going to talk to me about,
okay.
Endurance. I think the problem from a journalistic point of view is the FEI are doing what they can, but the problem is we do hear all these bad stories about the sport and we don't get enough good stories to report upon. Like, I was just sitting here listening to the fact that you've qualified. Why have I not been sent that story to report upon? And congratulating you on making into WEG and things like that. That's what I want to report on, and the pride that we would have in you competing for our country. Instead, we get all these doping scandals stories sent to us, all speculative, none proven, and we've got to report on them. And it would be great if the FEI or the endurance teams, we were sent more good news and we knew more about endurance from our riders' perspective rather than hearing about all the scandal that goes on, so I can report on the good stuff.
I just want to bring up something that Anna alluded to earlier, because it's something that I find it a dichotomy, really. It is the only equestrian sport where, as Anna has said, that at the end of the competition, you only get your red rosette or your medal if your horse passes a vetting. And I have, several times over the last few years, have asked various friends that train racehorses and other aspects, and I've said, how would you feel if at the end of a horse race, your horse had to go through a thorough vetting and you wouldn't actually get the prize unless it passed a vet, which, by the way, includes heart rate, etc. And I'm sorry to tell you that the vast majority of the trainers said I'd probably find a new career. And in terms of race riding, it would be probably quite interesting to implement something like that into the sport of racing, wouldn't it?
Well, let's not start a new hair running. No, I think it's endurance sport is a hugely exciting and worthwhile sport, and isn't it wonderful that there's still a sport where amateurs can do so well?
Absolutely. Anna, do you have anything else you'd like to say on that, being a future star?
Well, just the challenges are not insurmountable. We will get there. You know, we're at a crossroads, and I think it takes all of us to ensure that the path that we choose is the correct path. Yes, things do need to change quickly, but we have to understand that the options that we choose have to be sustainable. We've spoken a lot about sustainability and how important that is, but I'd perhaps just like to speak a little bit about what Jenny said, maybe the good stories that we don't hear of. I'd like to share with you a story that for me sums up the sport that I love, that I have grown up in. A senior championship took place in the Czech Republic just a few months ago, where medals were on offer, one of the highest level of events that you can compete in. Unfortunately, a horse and rider ran into difficulties on the track. Both horse and rider were fine, but the Russian endurance team came across this horse and rider on the track, and they stopped. So they put all of their chances of winning a potential medal all went out of the window because they chose to put aside their sporting ambitions, if you like, to stay and wait and look after the horse and rider until help arrived. And there's a real camaraderie, and perhaps this does come from the amateurs that still take part. But for me, when we still have people in our sport that are willing to give up their medal chances to put a horse and rider from another nation first to ensure that they're okay, that the horse is fine, when that is still put ahead of winning medals, that we still have a future, a very, very strong future.
Just like to... One comment from Wild Horse Welfare. We welcome the interim report of the FEI's Endurance Strategic Planning Group that clearly recognises the significant challenges facing the sport. We now move on to question 5, and I'd like to ask Dr. Carol Hall, Research Coordinator at Nottingham Trent University, for her question.
Thank you. I think some of the points made by the panel earlier actually give part of the answer to this particular question. But what is the solution to the current equine crisis in the UK?
The current equine crisis that has been mentioned earlier in various talks is this massive overpopulation of horses, and it's been estimated that there are 7,000 horses at risk in this country that are in need of rescuing and rehoming. And one of the key difficulties is that there's only so many places that these horses can go, and World Horse Welfare are bursting at the seams. And of course, we're coming into the winter now when the situation is bound to get more serious. Minister.
Thank you, Philip. So, for me, there are two crises in this, all wrapped up in this. And they're closely related, but they're not quite the same thing. One, and I think probably for me the most important, is that there are simply too many horses and ponies, due in large part, as I mentioned earlier, to overbreeding. The second is fly grazing, and it clearly arises partly because of the former, and it's a serious problem for farmers and local authorities and landowners. I talk regularly to Alan Davies, who's the Welsh minister. In fact, I saw him last week specifically to talk about this again. I think what they're doing is interesting, and I think it might help, but it won't solve the problem of oversupply, and indeed he doesn't, of course, claim it will. The reason we are reluctant to follow exactly what the Welsh are doing is that we're not yet convinced that it'll deal with the underlying problem, and indeed it might. This whole area of horse welfare is rather inclined, if you stamp down on something over here, another problem pops up over here. I know some people, for instance, are concerned that the Welsh measures will simply displace the problem into England, and I certainly am keeping a very close eye on that. We have, however, got a certain number of things up our sleeves to address the problem in England. In particular, several local authorities are working very closely with the police and the charities, sharing intelligence and how to do things well, and that is showing considerable promise. There are some new measures which are coming in under the antisocial behaviour bill, which is currently in front of Parliament, such as the community trigger, which will enable farmers to force local authorities to consider action. There have been some notable successes, actually, recently with the use of ASBOs, one in South Wales, where somebody is now serving time in prison, and one very recently in Bristol. But as I said earlier, for me, the long-term solution is to tackle overbreeding. It's very complex. I've asked for a meeting with the Equine Sector Council to discuss it, and I think what's quite telling is World Horse Welfare's need to breed initiative, and I think things like that are extremely helpful.
Anna, you were saying earlier that in Switzerland there's a more controlled environment. So this kind of crisis is sort of not relevant over there, is that right? I'm just interested to know what else they do in other countries.
No, certainly I haven't seen any cases such as these, and things are much more expensive horse-wise in Switzerland, so that even the cost of breeding, you take that into consideration before even considering before breeding a horse. Another interesting fact that we have is that you're not allowed to keep a horse on its own. By law, a horse is not allowed to be kept on its own. It has to have a companion. That said, you must have a stable for both of those horses. So that instantly, it's not like here where we can say, oh, well, I have a small field, I keep my horse in a field, so if I have a foal, it's not really going to make a great difference. We have to consider that as of a certain age, that foal has to have a stable. So that instantly cuts the breeding opportunities that are available for people.
Ian, we were talking earlier a little bit about passports. We were talking about the horse meat scandal. Ownership is obviously a key thing, admitting to ownership.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And what we were saying about the fly grazing, I know I've gone over to Ireland for a few years now buying wean foals, and you're always warned over there that if you don't lock up your truck, you'll find that it's full of unwanted horses by the time you get back to it. So it's a similar sort of thing, and that no one lays claim to these horses. So, I mean, the overbreeding is obviously the issue. We need to find a market to dispose of these horses, whether it's selling them or euthanizing them, whatever it is. But perhaps, and I'm just thinking on my feet here, perhaps we're getting near the point of registering owners. And maybe that's a way to go. That would be a headache for you, I have to say.
I mentioned at the beginning that there's an estimated 7,000 horses that require rescuing. Another figure, which I think is absolutely staggering, is that to date, in 2013, the World Horse Welfare have taken in 31% more rescue cases than this time last year. Jenny, what are your thoughts?
It's a staggering increase, isn't it? And
Very worrying.
I know Rowley very well, and I can see the stress that he has to go through. Don't even get me started. My main rant is the need to breed. I come across, just the other day, I retrained a Welsh Cobham vet for someone, and the problem was getting on and off her. She was a bit mental, and I managed to train this out, and the owner then sold her to a lovely lady down in Devon, who emailed me 2 months later saying she could no longer get on the horse. Whatever she'd done, she'd undone, and in her email at the bottom, so I'm going to breed from her. So, and I get this on a daily basis. Why are you breeding from her? If you can't get on her, just... And people don't want to hear it. If the horse has no use, often the best thing for it is euthanasia, and it's a horrible thing to say, but it's fact. I'd much rather see that than a horse sitting there with no use. But it's one of my biggest rants, and I just saw your advert earlier with the need to breed. Just because, and you hear it all the time, oh, I think she'd really like to have a baby. Would she? Really? I don't think so. Again, it's making horses human. You think you know what they want. I'm pretty sure she wouldn't want to stand in a cold field with a foal running around. I think she'd quite like a nice life working. It's one of the biggest rants, and what the solution is, I don't know. But again, I think it comes down to education and maybe licensing on people being allowed to breed, studs taking more responsibility, and not letting mares that aren't suitable but to be bred from, and matching up. I don't know what the solution is, but there's got to be a way of stopping people.
Thanks, Jenny. The Minister, there's an underlying subject, I feel, or common ground with all the questions that we've had and other talks, and you've referred to it 2 or 3 times. Education in every aspect probably would have helped all these situations, and possibly legislation.
Well, I'm listening very carefully, and as I say, I'm going to meet the Equine Sector Council, and all these things will be discussed. But it's a pretty complex mosaic, and I think we just need to be very, very careful. Legislate in haste, repent at leisure.
Thank you. I need to just refer to Rowley's. Rowley, I know we're running a bit late. Have we got time for any questions from the floor? One question. We've allowed to take one question from the floor for our learned panel. Would somebody like to put up? The first person that raises their hand gets... Christopher.
In a sentence, Christopher Hall, I would like to know, in a sentence from you, politely preferably, what advice you could give to each of us individually that would really help our splendid charity to promote ourselves and get the message over. Thank you.
Anna.
I'm not very good at only doing one sentence. I tend to rabbit on a bit. Very briefly, for me it's been a huge eye-opener today. We spoke about, Alex mentioned the general consumer, the general rider. It's been a huge eye-opener for me today. So I think getting the message out there really would help, because prior to today, I have to admit I wasn't aware of some of the work, yes, but not all of the incredible work that World Horse Welfare is doing. So I think social media, getting the word out there really, really would help.
Jenny, let's go.
I think exactly that. I mean, getting more people to days like this. I mean, I've come every year, and even if I didn't have to come for work, I would still come. It's educational, it opens up issues I didn't even know existed, and I think more things like this for the average person. I think don't assume that just because they've got lots of money and therefore lots of horses that they actually know what they're doing.
So, Minister, there's lots of great work being done, but not enough people know about it.
I think that's absolutely right. And what I was going to say was, it may not be what you expect to come from a minister, but those of us who know a bit about it, rather than sort of looking down our noses at those who we regard as newcomers to horse ownership, let's welcome them, let's make a bit of a fuss of them, let's try to help them to learn. And all of us recognise that we, for goodness sake, don't know everything, but we may be able to help others who know a bit less.
Ian, PR for anybody or anything is important. What do you think they could do?
I think that there is no doubt the World Horse Welfare are doing an enormous amount and are doing an enormous amount really, really well. My rant is always that horses must have a job to do, and some horses are not suitable for any job. And any horses that come in, we must continue to be slightly ruthless about the ones that we save and send on to another home, and the ones that we decide to get rid of. And I know the World Horse Welfare are doing that well, but I think that's something we need to stick with.
And thank you, Ian. I can say what happened? I was going to say from a personal point of view, there are a tremendous amount of volunteers that work for World Horse Welfare right across the country. And although we might not be aware of all the activities that they're doing, there is an awful lot of people out there working. Of course, one can only shout so loud with the team that one has and the finances available, but there's a tremendous amount of people amongst the World Horse Welfare who are doing a superb amount of work trying to get the word out. I recently went to one of the centres. I was invited to go and have a look round. And I honestly I must have met about 20, 25 of the people that were working at World Horse Welfare, and you would employ any one of them. They were all brilliant communicators. They looked at you, spoke to you in a charming manner. Absolutely fabulous bunch of people, and I congratulate World Horse Welfare on the people that they've got both employed and the people that are helping them voluntarily. And I think we have one more. I've been told we've got time for one more. Alex.
I hate to butt in, but I don't like butting in, that is, but I thought to add one thing between Anna and I. I'm slightly surprised to see that Anna and I are the only two sort of high-profile riders here today. There are a lot of...
Okay, I know I'm a has-been, but...
I think Pippa Funnell at the back of the room might disagree with you there. She's pretty high profile.
But I mean, just speaking today, and I mean, for me, I enjoy coming to these things because I learn a lot. I feel, in some ways, that I'm giving back a bit, if I can, from my perspective. But there are lots of other riders out there which have huge profiles, who I'm sure would not have a problem giving up their time to come to things like this, and not just here, but spend their time talking about the charities' work in other occasions. And you know, lots of other sort of commercial companies spend money to sponsor riders to do just the same thing, but us riders would be very happy to help World Horse Welfare further. And I think by doing that, we would get a lot of attention.
Well said, Alex. Well said. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the forum, and I'd like to say a very special thank you to all our panellists that have taken part. I hope you found it interesting, and I think I'm now going to hand over to Rowley. Oh, to Baroness Mallow. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, on behalf of us all, thank you to every member of the panel. If anyone ever thought that World Horse Welfare would work itself out of business, I think it's been sobering to learn today just how much is going on which is likely to need this charity, not only here but overseas. But it's also sobering that the problems which have taken up the most time today, which is the meat trade, which is the crisis in horses here, fly grazing, things that none of us ever knew anything about. Perhaps some did, but generality didn't. even 5 years ago. So there are new major problems arising all the time. I'd like to ask Red Owers, Chief Executive, if I may, to come forward and sum up.
Your Royal Highness, Your Excellency, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, follow that. I would like to first say a big thank you to our panellists, to everyone who's presented today, but of course you, the audience, for making this such a fascinating but essential debate. And of course to our Betfair, our sponsors, for making today possible. Now clearly the problems facing horses are not going to be solved in a morning of discussion. But what our aim has been today is to bring them out in the open and see how best we can address them. And as the speakers have so eloquently talked about throughout this morning, the horse is becoming more important in this world and not less. People around the world will be using horses more in the next generation. More people will be racing them and more people will be competing on them. More people will be riding them for leisure. More people will certainly be working them and relying on them for their very livelihoods. And more people will be forging that unique connection which helps horses to get more out of their lives. So what I want to do over the next few minutes, and I will pick up quite intentionally on a lot of what's been said, is to try and bring our discussions together in a collective call to action. And the big question for us is how do we best support this evolving horse-human partnership in the next generation? And in all honesty, I think the answer is quite simple, and that is collective responsibility. But what do I mean by that? What I mean is that we all, every single one of us in this room, have a role to play. We, the horse world in the UK and across the globe, must take full responsibility for all horses, both those we possess and those that we do not. It's simply not enough for us to look after our horses well, because we are the leaders. We are the riders, the owners, the trainers, the vets, the breeders, the charities, the medias, the regulators, the enforcers, the volunteers, and the lawmakers. We are the ones who have such an influence to shape the next generation for horses. And it is incumbent on each and every one of us to share what we have learned and demonstrate the benefits of treating every horse with respect, compassion, and understanding. For example, the sport industry has a responsibility for exporting horse welfare as part of the package of top-tier sport. When we sell our horses to other countries, we have to take some responsibility to set out the kind of care and treatment those horses should receive. Our racing and equestrian industries have benefited from hundreds of years of experience, learning how good and how important good welfare is to support. It's only right that we share this knowledge and our practical know-how to help these budding industries develop to the same standard as ours. Common standards for the welfare are the future. As Lord Howard mentioned earlier, the announcement of the establishment of the International Horse Sports Confederation is another example of how the world is getting smaller. Here again, those with the experience must lead the way to set the expectations for welfare, the use of veterinary medicines and standards. And at the heart of our responsibility is the premise that the welfare of the horse must never be subordinated to competitive or commercial influences in equestrian sport, in any equestrian sport. This is the FEI Code of Conduct, drafted with World Horse Welfare several years ago. But the principle applies to everyone in every sport, whether it be an established sport like racing or an evolving one like endurance. Now, clearly, the sport of endurance, you'll apologise, I should have been running through this, the sport of endurance has been in the headlines much of late, and whilst it is true that action should have been taken before now, we applaud the FEI and its Endurance Strategic Planning Group for tackling, amongst other issues, the real problems of doping and horse fatalities in some parts of the sport. The current situation in these parts is a flagrant abuse of horse welfare, and it has to stop now. The group has come up with some really hard-hitting measures to reverse the crisis. But of course, the sport will be judged in the actions in the months ahead and not just words. And the price of failure will be high for all horse sport. And furthermore, in such a very quickly developing sport, how can we expect other countries to follow the rules unless our own house is in order? Similarly, we in the horse world must assume responsibility for some of the invisible horses, the one who we don't see pulling the carts on the back streets, or those transported long distances to slaughter. As we have seen across our work in Africa, Central America and Asia, and in our field investigations across Europe, the reasons these horses suffer so terribly is because their keepers, often through no fault of their own, do not know how to take care of them. In some countries, poverty is also a factor, but we have seen even the most disadvantaged make the smallest changes to improve the welfare of their horse and therefore their own livelihoods. We, the vets, have a responsibility too. In many parts of the world, equine vets are numerous, respected, and can earn a living. This is not often the case overseas, where in many developing countries, horses are not even on the veterinary map, being neither companion animal nor livestock. And what we have heard from Derek this morning is the prime economic role over 100 million working equines play, and will likely play even more in many countries around the world. And yet the most basic veterinary care is unavailable to them. Vets in our country, we are in a privileged position to encourage and support universities overseas, to teach equine science, to fund bursaries, and to mentor young vets. Humanitarian aid agencies and governments in these countries must not be ashamed of the contribution that horses make to their citizens' livelihoods. Instead, they should embrace this sustainable and proven method of transport by promoting better veterinary services. Welfare charities, we must redouble our efforts to reach these horse owners through education. In short, we all need to work together, collectively, to build the infrastructure that will care and provide for these horses in the generation ahead. So, what is the role of government? Clearly, they cannot and should not do everything. We, as the horse sector, must take considerable responsibility for ourselves. And it is so encouraging in the UK right now that we have an Equine Sector Council that has helped to start to unify our representations to government. But government does have an important role to play to help horses, especially those that are most vulnerable. In the slaughter trade, the desire for profit can trump all other considerations, which is why we need an enforceable transport regulation and for this to be properly enforced. No country can claim they are protecting animals in their laws if they do not take the trouble to enforce them. And if the laws are unenforceable, then they must be changed. This is also true, as we've heard, for the identification of horses. Our current system is simply not fit for purpose. The horse meat scandal, for all its grim realities, has been a gift. As good it has been, I very much doubt the politicians in Brussels or Westminster would be sitting with the equine sector on working out how to create an effective ID system and develop a new central database without it. Making ID regulations fit for the next generation will require continued cooperation and political will. But we've got to keep the momentum going. We already know what failure looks like, and it is too high a price to pay. Without this traceability, we put grave risk the welfare of horses, we put at grave risk the safety of the food chain, and of course, we also put at grave risk the unnecessary spread of equine disease. Perhaps one of our greatest responsibilities is not to underestimate the threat that infectious disease poses to the UK horse population. Climate change and the growing ease of transport will only escalate this risk further for the next generation. That's why I think we should give a great deal of credit to DEFRA, following a little bit of prompting, it has to be said, from World Horse Welfare and others, for being on the cusp of an agreement with Ireland and France to restrict the current tripartite agreement. By only allowing horses with high health status the privilege of moving to and from the continent without health checks will, if enforced, significantly reduce disease risk and welfare abuses and make horses hopefully far less attractive to those who currently find it far too easy to use them as a cover for illegal pursuits. Closer to home, what is the future for horses in Britain? This is where we, the public, must take some responsibility. We breed some excellent sport horses, but we also breed a lot of horses that no one wants to buy. World Horse Welfare, along with the RSPCA, British Horse Society, Red Wings, Blue Cross and Horse World, warned last year that we were on the verge of a horse crisis, and now it is upon us. I don't use the term crisis lightly, but that's what it is. As we've heard, at least 7,000 horses are at risk right now of suffering or needing rescue. Charities are full. Our waiting lists are longer than ever. The very simple but highly effective answer to this, in part, is that we need to rehome more of our horses. Yet rarely does anyone think of rehoming a horse before buying one. And this has got to change. Horses are living longer, and often the best way to get a horse is through a charity. And so I'm delighted that our President has once again shown her outstanding support for World Horse Welfare by rehoming one of our horses this year. And we urge others to follow her lead. Please help all horses by promoting the rehoming of horses from charities rather than buying them off the internet. And you can go one better. Overpopulation is the largest welfare problem in the UK today and will face in the next generation. That's why World Horse Welfare, as you've seen, launched our Need to Breed initiative. And this specifically asks responsible horse owners to consider the impact of breeding just one foal. Because our research last year showed that far more foals are born to those who breed 1 to 5 foals in their lifetime to those who breed over 100, because there are so many more people doing it. Every little bit hurts. And as we have heard, fly grazing has become the scourge of our rural areas, and it is creating an increasing number of welfare problems across the country. We welcome the proposals from Wales to become a zero fly grazing area from next year. Now the baton falls to England. The Welsh proposals are not a solution, but they are a very good way of treating a significant symptom. There are thousands of horses being fly grazed in England as we speak, and this cannot go on. And despite charities' best efforts, we are very likely to see culls this winter of ponies left to rot in fields while their owners so easily deny all responsibility. And until we have laws that allow local authorities to seize horses on the spot and require owners to prove ownership to get them back, more horses will suffer and will almost certainly die. So, we've got some of the answers, but there is no doubting the great challenges that lie ahead. But I want this to be a positive message, because we as leaders of the horse world, we the vets, we the public, and we our government, in a country that is renowned for its love of horses and ability to do great things with them, have a responsibility to spread our knowledge far and wide. Knowledge is not just a preserve of universities, charities, and trainers. Together, we have the means to reach every horse owner in the world if we really want to. But we must act together. Everyone in this room can make a difference. And finally, before you go today, I want you to remember why we are here. It's not just for the horses overseas, as important as they are, but for the horses just around the corner in the garden of a neighbour's house. This is where we found ponies like this you'll see shortly, and why we are working so hard to make ignorance and indifference a thing of the past.
Trapped in a squalid prison, a foal and her mother locked in a rotting container for months. How could anyone do this to such sensitive animals? When we found Herbie, he could hardly walk, crippled by this nail stuck deep in his hoof. How could anyone ignore such an horrific injury? We rescued more than 20 horses from this filthy, dangerous scrapyard. And that's just one rescue we've made. How could anyone turn a blind eye to such clear suffering? Every day we hear of more horses being neglected, more being abused. Please, help us stop this. Today, we care for thousands of horses. Please visit worldhorsewelfare.org to give £2 a month, so we can be there for all the horses who need us. The mother and foal we freed now have a brighter future, and Herbie is a picture of health. But so many more need us. We need to rescue them, use all our expert care to make them well, and find them loving new homes. That's why we really need your help now. If, like us, you want to see happy and healthy horses, please visit worldhorsewelfare.org to give £2 a month to help abused and neglected horses. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming to the end of the formal part of the programme. There are just 3 more things that I, having had the honour of chairing today's morning session, would like to say to you. First of all, we are going to invite you to lunch upstairs. Please have a look round, have a chance to talk to the staff and the charity stands. As you may have seen in the programme, and as I've mentioned during the morning, the mini presentations will be starting in not very long at all now. 2:10, the first one in the map room, which is about the international work that this charity does. At 2:25, there is one about the horse crisis in this country, and then at 2:40 is one about what this charity is doing about the horse meat scandal. So please, if you possibly can, stay around and be there for them, because they are fascinating and show just what World Horse Welfare is doing right now. You will also see in your programme that there's an envelope where you can offer some financial support for the work that the charity is doing, and you can hand those envelopes in, hopefully with something inside them, at the fundraising stand or as you leave reception. And the charity would be profoundly grateful for any of the support you can give. We're all of us here because we care greatly about horses, and we've learnt today, if we didn't know it already, that the world is changing, and it's for us to play a part in ensuring that it changes for the better for horses. So can I thank you, ma'am, for the keynote address with which you set the tone for our conference, and can I thank everybody here who's made the time to be here and play their part today. Thank you very much. Time for lunch.